other honourable friends. It is a pleasure to introduce this significant and serious debate on migration and to support the incredibly reasonable and considered policy proposals recently published by the Scottish Government. Proposals that would ensure migration policy worked for every part of the UK, but also that policy is tailored to reflect Scotland's particular needs and circumstances. Indeed, those two features go together, for it is only by making sure that the system is tailored for the different parts of the UK that we actually ensure that it can work for all the different parts of the UK. And from the outset, it is important to emphasise that these proposals have been widely consulted upon and developed collaboratively. The report flags up support for a tailored system from organisations such as the Federation of Small Businesses in Scotland, from the Scottish Council for Development and Industry, from the Scottish Trades Unions Congress, from the Law Society of Scotland, from the David Hume Institute and the Royal Society of Edinburgh. Many more names could be added to that list, from the APPG on social integration to think tanks such as the IPPR. A range of academic reports have set out options for differentiation, including Dr Christina Boswell and Sarah Kiambi at the University of Edinburgh and Dr Eve Hepburn for the Scottish Parliament. International examples have been learned from Australia, Canada, New Zealand and Switzerland, amongst others. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, during the Brexit referendum, we were told by the now Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster that on the matter of future immigration numbers, it would be for Scotland to decide, because under the proposals that we have put forward, we believe that the points-based immigration policy would be the right approach. He went on to say that the head of the Leave campaign in Scotland had written to the First Minister explaining how Scotland can have a greater degree of control over immigration policy after Brexit. So I look forward to the support of the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Madam Deputy Speaker, the simple proposal put forward by the Scottish Government is for an additional visa route for people to come to live and work in Scotland. Learning in particular from Canada's provincial nominee programme, it would ideally be for Scottish ministers to set out the criteria and rules for selecting who could get one of those visas. The Scottish Government would then accept and reject applications against those criteria. The application would then transfer to the Home Office, not for reassessing the merits of the application, but to verify identity, check immigration history and to satisfy security requirements. The visa granted would include a requirement that the visa holder live in Scotland for its duration. There would then ideally be routes to settlement after that, probably at the 5-year mark. And it's absolutely acknowledged that a whole range of different models would be possible. The details and the numbers involved would be subject to negotiation. I'm happy to give it.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I'm with him that we need to make sure that our immigration system is fit for purpose and that it meets the needs of the UK's economy. Could you just explain, he said that people who would then be granted a visa, his expectation would be that they would stay in Scotland for the duration. How would he police that and how would he enforce it? Because there's a very great difference in scale between Scotland, England and Canada, America.
I will come to that point later in my speech, if I may, but I can think of examples much closer to home than those that he's just given, including, for example, the Republic of Ireland, where we have an open border with a country that has a completely independent immigration system. But nobody seems to think we have to close the border to the north or to introduce routine checks at ferry ports or anywhere else. But I will come back to that point later in my speech, if I may. Now, the reason why such a tailored approach is necessary, all the reasons have been rehearsed repeatedly by honourable friends in this House for several years and set out in a whole series of Scottish Government papers as well as in independent reports. Historically, Scotland's population story has been one of out-migration. It is only since 2001 that Scotland has seen a sustained period of net in-migration, driven by growth in both the number of EU citizens and people from the rest of the UK coming to live and work in Scotland. And while that recent history of in-migration and population growth has been welcome, the old history has left us with a legacy of a rapidly increasing older population and a smaller share of younger working-aged people. These challenges are not unique, but they are more pronounced in Scotland than for other parts of the UK and indeed Europe. Looking forwards and looking ahead towards mid-2043, even as matters stand, all of Scotland's very modest projected population growth is set to be from in-migration, with more deaths and births expected each year. Our working-age population is expected to remain the same size, but the population of older people will increase. These trends are either distinct to Scotland in the UK context or are far more pronounced than for the UK as a whole.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend who is making a very powerful case, but isn't there an economic imperative here, as he's just outlined, that Scotland's working-age population is going to decline? It means that there's not only a price to be paid for Scotland, but indeed for the rest of the United Kingdom in taxation receipts. Isn't what my honourable friend outlining a common-sense solution, one that learns from practices elsewhere in the world, where we can make sure that we can grow prosperity in Scotland, we can grow our population? What does he believe, that is driving the UK in simply saying no to the Scottish Government, other than just sheer vindictiveness?
It's a very interesting question. I look forward to hearing the reasons that are offered by the UK Government. But hopefully today, by listening to the case that the Scottish Government has made and that honourable friends will make, they will open their eyes and at least engage constructively with the proposals that we are putting forward. Against the background that I've described, Mr Deputy Speaker, surely nobody in this House can seriously suggest that if we were making changes to the immigration system for Scotland alone, the policy goal would be a reduction in the modest but sustainable levels of immigration that we have seen in recent years. Analysis shows that any such reductions in levels of EU migration will make all of these trends worse and risk putting both Scotland's working age population and indeed our overall population into decline. And as my right honourable friend points out, it cannot be overstated that all of this has huge implications for economic growth, for GDP per head, for our tax base and public finances, our economy and our society. Yes, we need the very highly qualified and the well-paid, but we also need those who are making an immense contribution to our country and economy, but who are not earning £25,000, whether that be in the care sector, the tourism industry, starting out in research, working in food and drink, agriculture, retail, or many other sectors of our economy. I'll happily give way to my honourable friend.
Giving way. According to the Higher Education Statistics Agency, the average starting salary for a graduate in Scotland is £23,500, which puts them significantly below the reduced salary thresholds that the UK Government are considering. Does my honourable friend agree that we need a full rollout of post-study work visa routes to ensure that talented graduates can make their career in Scotland?
Right, honourable friend is correct, and the sooner that happens, the better. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, what is it that we seek to achieve from today's debate? Now, I've been in this place long enough to know that even in the rather unlikely event that I made one of the greatest speeches in parliamentary history, the Immigration Minister and the Minister opposite isn't going to suddenly make a 360-degree U-turn and wholeheartedly embrace every aspect of these proposals, much as I'd love that to be the case. But what I'm simply asking them, the Immigration Minister in particular, is to seriously engage with these proposals. And indeed, I make that request of all honourable members across all the different parties. The Scottish Chamber of Commerce said after the MAC report was recently published, business will want to see the Scottish and UK Government working seriously and closely together on these and future recommendations, ensuring appropriate policies are devised and implemented that work for businesses and our economy. In anticipation of the Scottish Government report, Scottish Labour's External Affairs spokesperson said that Scottish Labour supports exploring a degree of flexibility within an overarching UK immigration system. And a spokesperson for the Scottish Conservatives said, "We are willing to look at any proposal which helps Scotland prosper in this new era." And I'd say to the Ministers opposite, if they were to speak to their MSP colleagues, I think they would find, privately at least, a degree of sympathy for the proposals that the Scottish Government is making. So please do engage with them as well. In contrast, from the Home Office, all we had was an unnamed spokesperson dismissing the proposals before they could even possibly have been read. And we've since had a fortnight not so much of serious engagement, but knockabout politics, nonsense and sound bites. So to draw a line under this skirmishing and to show the UK Government does treat with respect these suggestions brought forward by the Scottish Government and supported by Scottish business unions and civic society, I simply ask the Immigration Minister to agree to meet with Scottish Government ministers and officials before he finalises the new Immigration White Paper and introduces the new Immigration Bill. It was something that his predecessor Bar 1, the Right Honourable Member for Romsey and Southampton North, did on a regular basis when she attended Cabinet as the Immigration Minister, and I hope he can take his department back into that form of constructive engagement. And that would be far better than the nonsense and sound bites that have been served in the fortnight since the Scottish Government paper was launched, and I want to address some of those sound bites now. Mr Deputy Speaker, we've been told for about the 100th time that the UK Government wants an immigration system that works for the whole of the UK. Well, believe it or not, I'm quite happy to support that ambition too. But it's entirely consistent with what the Scottish Government proposes. We simply believe that a system that works for the whole of the UK can and indeed must reflect the different needs and circumstances of its different parts. Indeed, the Scottish Government paper expressly proposes further change to the UK-wide immigration system, changes which could benefit all of the UK, as well as practical tailored policies which provide solutions to Scotland's needs, drawing on international models. There's a whole chapter in the report dedicated to whole of the UK policy change, if only we could get people to read it, Mr Deputy Speaker. Is the Minister seriously saying that the Canadian migration system doesn't work for all of Canada because it has different rules for different provinces? In fact, most there would say that the systems and rules work better for the whole precisely because they are tailored to suit the different parts. We've also been told for the 100th time that immigration is a reserved matter. Now, again, I think we're all absolutely aware that that's the case for now. But of course, it doesn't have to stay that way, and we certainly would prefer that it didn't. But once again, nothing in the Scottish Government paper necessarily is inconsistent with that. I've explained that ideally it would be for the Scottish Government to draft the criteria and to consider applications for a Scottish visa. However, it could be that the UK Government itself defines the criteria and rules and then receives and assesses applications and issues visas. The UK Government does, of course, implement a shortage occupation list for Scotland, illustrating that tailored approaches are perfectly possible, even if they're not willing to go as far as formal devolution. Again, it's all in the paper if we could encourage people to read it. We've also been told a few times that the MAC has rejected the idea of a devolved system, but that is absolutely not a fair representation of what the Migration Advisory Committee said. It is true that the MAC decided, on balance and accepting that there were good arguments on both sides, that if the Government wants a salary threshold for Tier 2 visas, it should be one salary across the UK. That went against the majority of stakeholder submissions, particularly from Scotland. Nevertheless, it's totally wrong to say it rejected the case for devolving migration powers or introducing tailored rules for Scotland. To quote from the MAC report directly, "We acknowledge the desire of the Scottish Government for immigration to become a devolved rather than reserved matter, a question on which the MAC takes no position, seeing it as a political rather than an economic question." Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, one part of the MAC report that we do call on ministers to implement is where it recommended that pilot projects should be established to look at retention of migrants in remote and rural areas. That is a recommendation that the former Home Secretary, now Chancellor, accepted in a written ministerial statement back in July of last year. An entire chapter of the Scottish Government paper is about wanting to engage in the pilot process, and it has tasked its own expert group in migration and population to consider how this could best benefit Scotland's rural communities. So again, our ask is simple. Will the Immigration Minister meet with Scottish Government ministers and engage on how that pilot scheme can work in Scotland? Another old chestnut, Mr Deputy Speaker, is the argument that issuing a small number of Scottish visas would make the UK system too complex. Now, that takes some brass neck, given the state of UK immigration law and the complexity and bureaucracy that successive UK governments have imposed on those who come into contact with it. When it comes to work visas, it's widely accepted that the bureaucracy of the Tier 2 system might be surmountable for large multinational companies, but it's ill-suited and incredibly cumbersome for the small and medium-sized enterprises on which the Scottish economy is more reliant. The Scottish Government paper expressly adopts as one of its principles the need for the migration system to be easy to access and understand, and indeed the MAC and the UK Government have accepted the importance of making the process simpler. The visa proposed by the Scottish Government seeks to make things simpler still for employers by avoiding the burden of formal sponsorship and ensuring that salary thresholds did not exclude particular jobs. So there is every opportunity for the Scottish visa to make life simpler for employers and applicants rather than more complex. Finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister brought up the ludicrous old argument about a tailored system making a border a necessity. Now, honourable members know that successful tailored so-called regional migration systems exist right across the globe, including, of course, in the Government's favourite Australian system. Not a single one requires internal borders. Indeed, we might also quietly point out that the UK is happy enough to share an open land border and a common travel area with a country that has an entirely independent immigration system. Over the last 5 years, Ireland has issued an annual average of 27,000 visas to non-EEA nationals, who of course have no right to live and work across the border in Northern Ireland or in any other part of the UK. Next year, EU migrants going to Ireland will fall into that bracket as well, roughly doubling the number of people who will arrive into Ireland with the right to live and work there, but not in the UK. But no one is saying we need additional checks on people coming into the other parts of the common travel area. And that is because thinking of immigration control as simply what happens at the border is to fundamentally misunderstand it. Most immigration control depends on what happens in country. Successful enforcement includes selecting people who are most likely to comply with their visa restrictions, then the placing of appropriate conditions on what people can and cannot do once they've passed through the border, and only then on the enforcement action and sanctions that are applied if people do not comply. Indeed, the UK's main work route for non-EU nationals, soon to be rolled out to EU nationals as well, operates in precisely the same way. People have a visa that is tied to a particular employer. We don't make them comply by erecting a border around them or their workplace. We simply recruit a person we trust to do the job, place conditions on the visa and rely on enforcement and sanctions in the small number of cases where that is needed. And it's not just Ireland, Mr Deputy Speaker. Our friends in the Isle of On that point, I'll happily go.
I'm listening very carefully to what he said. He's absolutely right. Quite a lot of enforcement of our immigration system are the in-country rules. But having read his paper carefully, he's proposing a Scottish visa that isn't tied to the sponsorship of a particular employer, has no requirements for a minimum salary, and it seems to me would therefore be a complete open door for people getting into the country that way with no one to carry out any in-country enforcement. So I think he's just destroyed his own argument.
I've absolutely not destroyed my own argument, because the parallel again is with Ireland. The in-country checks would take place in those parts of the United Kingdom where people are not entitled to live and work. So if somebody, I mean, it's often said that this would be a backdoor to working in other parts of the UK, but the checks exist here. If somebody with a Scottish visa applies for a job in London, they're going to be turned down because there are sanctions for employers who then break those rules, and there are sanctions for the people that actually do that as well. It works perfectly well, and again I say nobody is suggesting that we need to take any action in relation to people coming in via Ireland, and it would be exactly the same for the far smaller number of people using the Scottish visa.
Read the report, then.
And can I also say, Mr Deputy Speaker, it isn't just Ireland that we're talking about. Our friends in the Isle of Man get to issue their own visas, and yet the UK is happy to operate a common travel area with that as well. If the Isle of Man can do this, why not Scotland?
Exactly.
Now, it hasn't been selected, but let me finally address the Lib Dem amendment. There is little in its critique of the UK immigration system that I could possibly quibble with, and it is consistent with the principles of dignity, fairness and respect that the Scottish Government paper refers to, and in which it reiterates its call to end limitless immigration detention and to close Dungavel Detention Centre. My party and I have been making these points for years on end, and we did so in one of our most recent opposition to debates last summer. Indeed, my party were making these points even while some honourable members on the Lib Dem bench were part of the coalition government delivering aspects of the hostile environment that they now condemn. As the amendment states, I want a fair, effective immigration system for the whole of the UK. But again, there is absolutely no reason why that cannot incorporate tailored approaches for the different parts of the UK. And I urge our members also to engage positively on these issues. Their amendment should have added to our motion and not attempted to replace its substance. Mr Deputy Speaker, the case for a devolved or at least a tailored system for Scotland is powerful and verging on the unanswerable. We are at a pivotal moment for migration policy and for Scotland's population. The overarching objective of UK government policy is to reduce migration. Nobody in this chamber can seriously dispute that such a policy goal is wholly inappropriate for Scotland. The Scottish Government, after extensive consultation with stakeholders, has put forward serious but reasonable proposals for a Scottish visa, based on a wealth of research and international experience. I urge ministers and members across the House to engage seriously with these proposals, because failing to do so risks drastic consequences for Scotland. And if this engagement does not happen, if these proposals are not taken seriously and nothing done to avoid those drastic consequences, then more and more people will consider the other way to avoid these drastic consequences. And that is, of course, to pursue our own independent migration policy, just like Ireland does as an independent country.
The question is, as on the order paper. Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I begin by congratulating the honourable gentleman for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East for the way he has presented his case today, and indeed the way the Scottish National Party members have promoted their report recently produced by the Scottish Government. The honourable gentleman and I, in the previous Parliament, served together on the Home Affairs Select Committee, and I hope he will agree that while we robustly debated a number of issues, we did respect differing opinions and views, even though we didn't agree with each other's outcome. And one thing I can agree with today, and respond directly to a request he has made of myself and other ministers, is a 360-degree turn of my position. And I can update the House today that I will turn my decision around 360 degrees and return to exactly where I started off, as that's what he was asking. And I have to say, when he was asking me for a 360-degree turn, I did wonder if he was taught by the same person who told the leader of the SNP that a bridge between Northern Ireland and Scotland would go across the North Sea. But that's maybe the SNP Scottish education system coming out in that. But can I also say that while there will not be a meeting of minds between myself and the honourable gentleman on this matter, because this government is committed to introducing a new immigration system that works for the whole of the UK, for Scotland, for England, for Wales and Northern Ireland. And that's why the government has engaged and continues to engage extensively with many stakeholders across Scotland, including the Scottish Government, but crucially also businesses across a wide range of sectors. Their views help us to develop our plans for the future immigration system. We will introduce a firm and fair immigration system that focuses on what individuals contribute, not where they come from, those who will benefit the whole of the UK. The recent report that the Scottish Government produced outlines the demographic challenges facing Scotland, but these challenges are manifest in other parts of the United Kingdom as well. And we're committed to devising a system that helps address those challenges, but we have no plans to devolve powers over immigration. To introduce a devolved or regional immigration system would bring about significant complexities and would simply not be practical. Instead, we'll introduce a new system that recognises the needs of all the nations and regions of the United Kingdom and offers more of the sort of flexibility that employers and others have called for. Indeed, on the day the Scottish Government report was published, my honourable friend, the Minister for Immigration, was in Glasgow announcing this government's commitment to the science community through our new global talent route that will attract people with specialist skills, including the top researchers, scientists and mathematicians from around the world. We will create a bespoke visa schemes for new people who will fill shortages in our public services, build the companies and innovations of the future and benefit Britain for years to come. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Minister's point to his conclusion there, what he was saying is, if we can develop a system for Scotland which suits Scotland's immigration system, is healthy for our country, if it doesn't work in other parts of the United Kingdom, then it's not suitable for the United Kingdom.
Yes.
What I was saying, if the honourable gentleman was listening, was the problems in Scotland are not unique to Scotland. These are problems that we face across the United Kingdom, and it is surely better we address problems across the United Kingdom rather than trying to address problems which the SNP seem to think are unique to Scotland, but they are not. We will create a fast-track NHS visa for medical professionals with NHS job offers, reducing visa fees and providing support to come to the UK with their families. And of course, the Scottish National Health Service will benefit equally with the rest of the United Kingdom. As I've said, we have laid the rules to introduce new visa routes to recruit leaders in their field to come to the UK, offering the best graduates and winners of scientific prizes fast-track entry to the United Kingdom.
I'm very grateful. But surely he must agree that what we see is that the jagged edge of devolution, and that powers are given on the one hand over health or developing the economy. And yet even in Wales, where the Open University Business Barometer looked at and estimated that businesses were costing £150 million a year in trying to fill the skills gap, what we do not have in Wales, just as in Scotland, is the means to fill that skills gap tailor-made for Wales. This is the jagged edge of devolution, and it's not allowing us to develop properly.
I say to the honourable lady, I have experienced politics in Scotland for a long time, and I believe the Scottish Parliament has a great deal of powers to improve the lives of the people of Scotland. I think the problem is the people who are currently operating those powers, and the SNP Scottish Government are letting down the people of Scotland. Now, we have already announced the creation of a new graduate route which will help our world-leading universities, including those in Scotland, continue to attract talented young people and allow students to stay and apply for work for up to 2 years after they graduate. It's important that these changes are introduced to the United Kingdom as a whole. Under the terms of the devolution settlement, immigration is reserved, and it's right that it continues to be so. It's also better for those using the system, both migrants and those who sponsor them, such as employers and educational institutions. There are many workers whose job is necessarily peripatetic. Trying to pin down the worker to a particular location is not a straightforward proposition. An assessment of an individual's tax code would not be sufficient to determine their immigration status. It might indicate where an employee spends some of their time, or even where the company's head office is, for example, where payroll is managed, but what it wouldn't do is provide any certainty where the employee spends the bulk of their working time. On the subject of employers, as just one example, let us imagine the burden for an employer who is constantly having to determine whether he or she can deploy particular workers to certain areas depending on the terms of their visa. So take, for example, an engineer who works for a company that has several contracts in both England and Scotland. Could a migrant on a Scottish visa fulfil that role? And I certainly foresee significant complications and litigation surrounding that. I will give way.
There are different ways you could do it. I, for one, would suggest that they should be allowed a limited number of days working in other parts of the UK. But for a firm like that, what they do is they simply use the main UK immigration system. They'd apply for a Tier 2 visa in the normal way. These are additional visas to allow employers to bring in people who won't qualify for the main UK visas. It's additionality. It's not an alternative and more complicated way of doing things.
Suspicion always?
So unfortunately, the honourable gentleman who's promoting this debate is coming up with more and more add-ons to this. In his own party's paper, which I have read from cover to cover, he says it is to deal with the majority of people who will be working in and only in Scotland. And the example I've given is just one example of many where people could be employed by a company in Scotland yet working in other parts of the United Kingdom, and I do foresee significant problems with that. I just want to make a bit of progress if I can, because I have given way several times so far. We also need to consider the economic justification of what is being proposed. We're very fortunate in this country that we're able to rely on the independent and impartial advice of the Migration Advisory Committee. The MAC is appointed by fair and open competition and always issues a call for evidence when conducting its inquiries to ensure it has the widest range of evidence to draw on. Its recent reports show that Scottish interests are well represented in the evidence which the MAC received, and MAC members visited all parts of the United Kingdom as part of the process of coming to its conclusion. Given that the MAC consults so widely in producing its advice, I think it is worth reflecting on what the MAC has said. In its report on EEA migration in the UK, published in September 2018, the MAC said this on regional differentiation in the immigration system: "We do not consider that there is sufficient evidence to make such a differentiation on economic grounds." The MAC went on to say in the same report, "In previous reports, the MAC has recommended against introducing more regional variation for a number of reasons. We have considered it desirable to keep the system as simple as possible, and the salary thresholds have been set based on national pay distributions and not by the demands of higher wage regions. Similar arguments have been used against regional variation in setting the national minimum wage." But this is clear advice from the MAC that it wasn't sufficient to end the calls from the Scottish Government for a separate system. So the MAC was obliged to return to this issue once again. The most recent MAC report on the points-based system and salary thresholds was published only last month. And again, the MAC's recommendations were clear. And I quote, "We have considered regional salary thresholds and can see the arguments on both sides. And on balance, we have concluded that the relevant salary threshold should apply across the United Kingdom. This is in line with previous MAC recommendations, but also in line with other bodies, such as the Low Pay Commission, that has also always recommended a UK-wide minimum wage." So although, and it continues, although there are some economic arguments for regional variation, there are not large enough to justify the added complexity of regional variation in salary thresholds.
The Minister for giving way. 2 points. First of all, it's slightly rich of the government to be hiding behind a MAC report, given it's just sacked the chairman of the MAC, essentially because it didn't buy into the Australian points-based system bonanza. But secondly, though, if he was listening to my speech, the MAC was there considering very specifically salary differentiations throughout the United Kingdom. It said quite specifically that it was taking no view on the issue, no position on the issue of whether or not migration should become a devolved rather than a reserved matter, because that's a political rather than an economic question. So it did not come to a view on whether migration should be devolved.
I do think it's rather rich, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the honourable gentleman is criticising me for quoting from the MAC report and then quotes from the MAC report itself. If it's good enough for him to quote from the MAC report, it is also good enough for me to quote from the MAC report. And a final quote from it, which said, "We would also not want to institutionalise some parts of the UK as lower wage regional inequalities, and lower wage regional inequalities should be addressed through equalising wages." The Government shares the view and is committed to levelling up agenda. I'd like to believe that this view is shared in all parts of the House. And I want to say something on the role of the Scottish Government, who commissioned the report that we are discussing today. I will give way.
The Minister for giving way. Can I take him back to his enthusiasm for the work of the Migration Advisory Committee? According to their own website, these 6 good citizens consist of 2 from the London School of Economics, 1 from the University of York, 1 from the University of Warwick and Coventry, 1 from the University of Oxford one from the University of Southampton. According to the biographical information on the MAP website, none of them have declared any previous experience working in Scotland, and as far as I know, Wales or Northern Ireland either. If he really wants to have an immigration system that works for the whole United Kingdom, and while I welcome the government's newfound enthusiasm for the virtues of elite academic experts, as these people no doubt are, if he wants an immigration system that works for the whole UK, surely that should be looked at and analysed by people with experience of working in all parts of the UK.
I am extremely sorry to hear that an experienced member of the SNP, and backed up from a sedentary position from the Chair of the Scottish Affairs Select Committee, who, if he allows me to continue, doesn't think that the MAC reports are in any way relevant to Scotland because there is no one Scottish on it. The MAC consult widely with Scotland, and it is clearly one that is worthy of quoting twice now by the front bench member from the Scottish National Party. And the membership is made up of experts who consult and engage with Scotland before they commission any report. And I think we should thank them for their efforts rather than criticising them for not being Scottish enough. It's a particularly sepsis argument that we get from the SNP time and time again. I want to start, Mr Deputy Speaker, to bring my remarks to a close, because I was saying that I wanted to mention the role of the Scottish Government, and I wonder if that's why we now suddenly have a number of SNP members trying to interject, because it's the Scottish Government who have considerable powers at their own disposal on education, infrastructure, economic incentives and taxation that can deal with many of the concerns that are being raised. And if there is concern about falling population in Scotland, I would encourage the SNP MPs on the benches opposite to engage with their colleagues in the Scottish Government to look at how they can make Scotland a more attractive place to live and work. This Government recognises the value of immigration, provided it is properly controlled. That's why we're ending free movement and introducing a new points-based system, a system that will ensure the best and the brightest talent from around the world will be able to come to the United Kingdom. This will enable us to exercise control while at the same time reducing overall migrant numbers. And further details of our future system will be set out in the near future. I'm bringing my remarks to a close because I know there are a number of people that want to get in. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is a government with an ambitious agenda, and we're going to transform the immigration system, creating a world-leading points-based system that works for each and every part of the UK and gives people in the United Kingdom the assurance that we have control, but can also bring in those who can help our country. We will speed up and simplify the system, but crucially avoid the complexities that will ensue from having different arrangements for different areas. I do not believe it would benefit any part of the United Kingdom to adopt an approach based on fragmentation. This Government believes in a migration system that works for the whole of the UK. Unlike the movers of this debate, this Government believes in the notion of the United Kingdom. But I want to finish by saying that I will personally continue to have a very open and frank dialogue with members opposite and the Scottish Government. Scotland's two governments can actually work together on this important issue, and I can assure members opposite and on all sides of the House that the Scotland office door will remain open to discuss this going forward. Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Belravira Addy.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I would like to thank the SNP for calling this debate. It's often falsely claimed that we never talk about migration in this country. On the contrary, it seems that many on the benches opposite and their supporters never stop talking about immigration. But what separates today's motion from so much else is its attempt to talk rationally about migration. That alone is a breath of fresh air. Furthermore, today's motion sets the discussion in terms of what our needs are wherever we are located, in terms of what is needed for our society, our education system, our public services and our economy. That must be the right overall approach, otherwise people are arguing about what immigration system we want, irrespective of the consequences to our society and to our economy. And only a charlatan or worse would argue that they wanted an immigration policy that disregarded the consequences. On close inspection of today's motion, there is nothing that is objectionable in it. There is one point of disagreement, which I will return to, Mr Deputy Speaker. It is clear that this Government has taken a high-handed and dismissive approach to the publication of the Scottish Government's migration needs, the Migration Helping Scotland Prosper paper. It must be correct that the Home Secretary should engage positively with all elected politicians, although yesterday's urgent question on charter flight deportations shows that that's still a work in progress. And of course, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster should be a man of his word in his promises on devolution. All of this is entirely reasonable. This is the main content of today's motion. My one caveat in relation to the motion, which does not negate my previous remarks, is that we on this front bench do not believe Scotland is a uniquely special case that would require a tailored migration policy for Scotland. Skills and labour shortages are a common feature across this country. To take the obvious examples, there are over 100,000 vacancies in the NHS alone. There are enormous shortages of workers in social care. The country lacks skilled engineers. We have labour shortages in agriculture. We have skill shortages in science, in research and in the academy. Altogether, the Office for National Statistics reports that there were still over 800,000 vacancies in the job market at the beginning of this year. They are concentrated in healthcare and social work, but there are huge shortages of professional and scientific workers. Yeah, I'll give way.
I'm very grateful to Honourable Lady, and I think we're all grateful for her support for this motion. Can I just ever so gently say to her, though, that I know that there's issues across the rest of the United Kingdom, and there is skill shortages in large parts of the UK. We found that in the Scottish Affairs Committee inquiry. But in Scotland, we could do something about it. We have a democratic political institution called the Scottish Parliament that can assume these powers and at least make it better for Scotland. Surely, if we can do that, we should do that.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his remarks. But there are huge shortages of professional and scientific workers, as well as the wholesale and retail trade and in the hotels and restaurants all across this country. Of course, the government's plans for a new migration system does not take this into account. They pretend they have an Australian points-based system, which Professor Alan Manning, the departing chair of the Migration Advisory Committee, has derided as a soundbite. What the government actually proposes is a crude income threshold for immigration, and on that we can agree. It ignores completely those underpaid sectors and jobs where there are skills or labour shortages. It is precisely the system which is set irrespective of the consequences on our society and on our economy. Hospitals need cooks, cleaners and porters too, not just brain surgeons. And this applies not just in Scotland, but in all the countries and regions. There are further concerns about what might amount to a devolution of immigration policy. The value that workers provide is the most important contributor to production. There are severe problems created by artificially limiting the flow of labour to where the jobs are, as this government will do with its Brexit policy. But there are further, if lesser, difficulties created by limiting the flow of labour within our nations and regions, as a Scottish-only immigration policy would do. Say a Scottish NHS trust recruits a junior doctor from overseas, but to further her training after a few years, the best place for her to go is Birmingham General. How will a Scottish-only visa help her? Or an engineer recruited to Aberdeen who now seeks to fill a post in Leeds, and so on. I'll give way.
Lady for giving way, and I welcome her to her new role and agree with much of what she says. But on this particular point, the whole idea is that this Scottish visa means that that doctor is able to come to Scotland when otherwise they wouldn't have been. If that doctor has to move, or any other employee has to move around different parts of the UK, they do it using the mainstream UK immigration system. This is additionality, it's not an alternative. If the Scottish visa doesn't exist, we're talking about people who won't be here at all, so the issue of mobility around the whole UK doesn't arise.
I thank the honourable member, and I do appreciate that. And what I would say is, in the case of the Scottish Government, there is currently a very welcome, rational and reasoned approach to migration. And in case the compliment was not obvious, I'll make sure that it is. But no one can say that that will always be the case, or that it has even been the case in all the nations and regions now. So the widespread use of devolved powers in immigration could create a bizarre and unworkable recruitment process and practice across the regions if others started to take a less rational approach because of changes in government. It would be to impose non-tariff barriers on ourselves and on the most important factor of production, which is workers themselves. Instead, we should aim for a reasonable and fair migration system which benefits us all. And so that no one confuses my remarks with the remarks of the Honourable Minister opposite, this is not the same immigration minister as the same immigration policy as the government. No. We would rather be welcoming all those who contribute to our well-being in the widest possible sense, upholding their rights to a family life as equals in the workforce and as citizens when it comes to voting and access to public funds, as I'm sure the Scottish National Party would agree with. No taxation without representation remains a great rallying cry, and we can add no taxation without access to the benefits of taxation. That should be our approach to migrant workers we have welcomed here and their families. And whilst I share the Scottish National Party's frustrations and actually many of their views in terms of things like immigration detention, I would say that the best way for all of us to have a fair and humane and economically sound immigration policy that benefits us all would be to see off the current government. And I'm sure they would agree. I would like to reiterate, I welcome today's motion, its tone and its overall approach, but we do not agree with the proposal to devolve immigration policy. I also note that the motion only calls for the Home Secretary to engage positively with that proposal. That is an entirely reasonable and democratic demand, given the status of the Scottish Government. Thank you.
Mark Harper.
Mr Deputy Speaker, thank you. First of all, let me just respond to the it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady. I have to confess to being somewhat confused. I listened to her opening remarks where she welcomed the motion from the SNP and said she broadly agreed with it, and then spent the rest of her speech going through all the areas where she didn't. But I do welcome, though, the fact that she put on record post the general election and confirmed effectively what the Labour conference last autumn said it supported. She confirmed that Labour basically wanted to have an open door policy for migrants. She specifically said that she wanted migrants to have access to the benefit system from day one. It was very helpful that she confirmed that, and she also confirmed that they don't believe in having any detention centres, and I think that, and she alluded to the fact, she referred to the recent Home Office flight, and I'm pleased to see my honourable friend, the Home Office Minister, in his place. And may I just say, as a former Immigration Minister, can I congratulate him on the fortitude of the Home Office in ensuring that around 20 foreign national offenders guilty of very serious criminal offences have been removed from our country. They weren't British citizens, they were foreign nationals, abused the hospitality that our country offered them by committing very serious criminal offences. I, for one, and I think I speak for many members of the public, am pleased that they're no longer here. So I congratulate my honourable friend on standing up to the pressure that he was put under for those that forget that we're supposed to be in the business of protecting the public and removing serious offenders. Now let me turn to the motion on the order paper. First of all, if you look, and I think the honourable gentleman in his wide-ranging speech did talk about this, he referred to the proportion of the Scotland's proportion of the United Kingdom population and its share of migrants. It's very interesting if you look at the data, Mr Speaker. We have a very significant number of migrants coming to the United Kingdom, whether you look at it in net terms or gross terms. And what's very interesting is if you look at the gap between the proportion that Scotland makes up of the United Kingdom's population and the other constituent parts of the UK, and the proportion or where migrants choose to go, it's very clear that of all of the parts of the United Kingdom, the gap between the number of migrants choosing to go to Scotland relative to its population is the biggest anywhere in the UK. In other words, most migrants that come to the United Kingdom prefer to go to England, Wales and Northern Ireland relative... Well, let me just finish the point, and of course I will take the interventions. Relative to the size of their populations, and after I've taken the intervention, I may set out one or two reasons why I think that may be the case, of course.
For giving way. And of course we remember his contribution with the go-home vans that he introduced when he was Immigration Minister. But we'll leave that aside just now. Surely he's actually making the very case that given that we're getting such a low amount of migrants coming to Scotland, surely he's making the case for allowing Scotland to have the ability to recruit more migrants to come to Scotland.
First of all, I make no apologies for wanting people who are in the United Kingdom illegally to go back to their countries of origin. I think people should obey the rules, they should follow the law, and they should not be here when they shouldn't be here. And I make no apology for that. The point I was making was that you need to look at the reasons why people may not be choosing to go to Scotland. And one of the clear points made in the Scottish Government's own paper when it's looking at the experience of Canada and Australia is that it's the economic performance of countries that determines their attractiveness to migrants. And I just simply note, well, let me finish the point, and of course I'll give way. I just simply note that over the next 4 years, the United Kingdom's economy is forecast to grow more quickly than Scotland's, according to both the OBR, which is of course an independent forecasting organisation, and the Scottish Fiscal Commission. It says that the Scottish economy will grow by less than 1% in 2019, less than 1% in 2020, just over 1% in 2021, and just over 1% in 2022, significantly lower than the projected growth rates for the United Kingdom, which suggests to me that if the Scottish Government was more effective at increasing the Scottish growth rate, we may see more migrants choosing to go to Scotland. And on that point, of course, I better give way to the honourable gentleman whose motion it is, and then I'll give way to his honourable friend.
I thank the Minister for giving way, but it's a chicken and egg situation, and he's got it the wrong way around, if he can. The point is, all those papers and the MAC itself suggests that if you are able to attract more migrants, then your economy will grow. We need the powers to attract more people, to allow in more people in order for to grow our economy faster. Indeed, this was a point that the Minister referred to a previous time in the Home Affairs Committee. He was very good at pointing at how the Tier 2 system was wholly unsuitable for Scotland, and that is one of the key reasons why Scotland and pretty much everywhere outside London struggles to compete to attract migrants.
Yep. I'm very interested he says that, because he was chastising people before for not having read the Scottish Government's paper. In their own paper, talking about the Canadian experience. The reason why I'm mentioning Canada and Australia is because those are the two models that they talk about. Ignoring, of course, the fact that both Canada and Australia are geographically vast countries, and I don't think their geographical experience is particularly relevant to the United Kingdom's. But it specifically says on page 81 of the Scottish Government's paper that the migrants reported that the most significant factor affecting retention in the province of nomination, so in other words, migrants staying in the province where they originally went, was economic. An onward movement was most likely to occur where they considered that better or more job opportunities were available outside of their original province, which points to the importance of linking provincial migration with labour market opportunities. Now, if I follow through his argument that London is a much more attractive place, following through the logic of the arguments made in his own paper, that says that the Scottish Government would allow lots of people to go to Scotland. They would then look across the United Kingdom at more attractive job opportunities available, which he's just pointed out were in London, and they wouldn't stay in Scotland, thus effectively nullifying the policy. Now I'll give way to his honourable friend.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and perhaps he can explain then, because we will all experience this kind of thing in our surgeries, and I hope the Minister will pay attention as well. I have a young constituent who's from Australia. Her name is Jessica. She works for the Beatson Cancer Clinic in Glasgow. She wants to stay there. Her colleagues want her to stay there. She's making a hugely valuable contribution to the workplace, to the economy, to the culture, and she can't because of the arbitrary salary thresholds imposed by this government's limits. So this government is actively sending people who do want to stay here, actively excluding them from our economy, and that's why we need those powers in the Scottish Parliament.
A very good question, because it provides me with the opportunity to just say just one or two words, Mr Deputy Speaker, about the government's proposals for its Australian-style points-based system, which I think actually allow some of the flexibilities, which I think the Minister alluded to in his speech, which would deal with some of the concerns that Jessica might have. For example, under the plans, there would be skilled migrants would get points for a job offer at the appropriate skill level. That would clearly be appropriate for Jessica. A job offer with an approved sponsor company. A salary of at least $25,600, but it makes it clear in the plans that are to be published later this week that the score awarded for salary, people on $23,000 will still be available to earn points, and those who earn less than $25,600 will score double points for working in a sector where there's a skills shortage, which I think actually is a more flexible approach than that taken at the moment. And there would also be more points, I understand, available for younger applicants and those also planning to work outside London, thus dealing with the point that the honourable gentleman made about the attractiveness of the labour market in London. So I think, given that this system hasn't yet come into force and hasn't yet been set out in detail, I think it would be sensible for us to at least give it an opportunity to see if it deals with some of these complexities and the experience of his constituent Jessica before throwing it away. Of course, I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Gentleman for giving way, and on the points-based system and what the Migration Advisory Committee says, is he aware that his own government has not provided sufficient information to advise on whether the current system or a future system will work well? And they say in their own report, we have little idea whether the current system works well because we have not been able to obtain relevant data. We recommend a pause in the proposed increases in the settlement income threshold. We also recommend there should be a review of the criteria for settlement, though that can only be done if there's better data available. Does he not agree that his government seem to be thwarting the efforts of that Migration Advisory Committee and don't seem to be in favour of the system that he's suggesting?
No, I don't. The Migration Advisory Committee, the clue's in the name, it provides advice to the government, but I'm very pleased we live in a country where decisions are taken by ministers who are accountable to this House, and I look forward to my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, setting out the government's plans once they've been approved by the Cabinet. Just one point I did want to touch on briefly, Mr Deputy Speaker, which I've never quite understood, and it was, I think it was touched on by the Honourable Lady who speaks for the opposition as well, and it's issue about pay and skill shortages. Now, I suppose it's because people on the left broadly don't believe in a market economy, but my view is that if there are sectors of the economy where employers are having trouble recruiting people, that rather suggests that what they should do is increase the pay in those sectors or improve the training that they provide, the economic value to those constituents. In a moment, what we shouldn't do is simply acquiesce in allowing them to import an unlimited number of people to keep down the wages of those people working in the sector. And sometimes, as a Conservative, that's an uncomfortable message to deliver because we are the party of business and economic growth. That's certainly the view of business. But sometimes we actually should say to business, do you know, you shouldn't actually be able to employ an unlimited number of people. Let me just finish my argument. An unlimited number of people from overseas and keep wages down. What you should actually do is increase the salaries you pay to your staff or to increase the training opportunities to improve their productivity. And I think actually government having that level of creative tension with business would actually be a more healthy one than simply allowing them to import cheap labour. I think the honourable gentleman, third row back, was first, of course.
Honourable gentleman for giving way. Can you explain then if the response to staffing shortages and skill shortages is to pay people more? Why is it that when the health service was experiencing desperate shortages of staff right across the board, his government imposed year after year after year of public sector pay cuts in real terms?
Mr Deputy Speaker, I know opposition members always find this very tiresome, although it tends to be one from the official opposition, but he will know that when the Conservative government came into office in 2010, we faced a situation of a very significant deficit in the public finances. Something, of course, well, they immediately start jeering, Mr Deputy Speaker, but it's true. It needed dealing with, and this side of the House had to take some very difficult decisions, and actually on this I'll commend Liberal Democrat members who took part in the coalition government to get the public finances in order. And I'm surprised particularly that Scottish nationalist members of Parliament don't understand about big deficits in the public finances, because of course Scotland has a very significant deficit in its public finances of around 7%, very significantly higher than the rest of the United Kingdom. Of course, I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way, and I take him back to the view of business. Of course, as my honourable friend outlined in his very good speech to open this debate, there was quite considerable support that was garnered from business groups and other stakeholders across Civic Scotland who supported the Scottish Government's plan, who thought it was a good idea. Does he therefore regret the fact that his government took a whole 20 minutes to denounce and to disagree with the Scottish Government's proposal? And does he find that disrespectful to those groups who provided that support across Civic Scotland?
I'll come back to what I think should happen at the end of my remarks when I'm setting out why I think the House should oppose the motion. On the point about business, I think, if I may say so, the honourable gentleman's just rather proved my point. Of course, business, particularly big business, is in favour of having an open-door immigration system which enables them to import labour from around the world and keep down wages and not have to pay people to reflect the skills and train them properly. And that is something where I've had this conversation myself when I was Immigration Minister and subsequently with business. And sometimes you do have to push back a little bit and explain to businesses that they need to increase their salaries, increase their training and increase their productivity in order to pay those salaries. And I think that's a good message for the public. Now, I'll just take the honourable gentleman from the Liberal Democrats wanted to intervene first, and then I'll take the honourable gentleman.
Deputy Speaker, I do not rise in connection with the early reference to my party. However, taking a broader view of this issue, while the points are well made about the economy, about pay and conditions, would the honourable gentleman agree with me that part of attracting people who might be useful to our economy to move here and to contribute to the economy and to bring their families here is more than just working conditions and the economy of the area, but also about services, as already been touched on, such as health, such as transport and such as education, or within the context of my own constituency, even broadband connectivity?
I do, and clearly the attractiveness, I didn't want to labour the point about all of the areas in which I think the SNP-run Scottish Government is failing the people of Scotland. I simply focused on economic growth. If I were pushed, I could clearly focus on their underperformance on health and on education as the Scottish Scotland falls down. I don't know why. Well, I don't think the missing all of the Scottish Government's targets for the performance of the health service is a laughing matter. Particularly, I think that's something that the SNP ought to take a little more seriously. Now, I have 3 more points to make before I conclude, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Let me pick up the issue around enforcement, which I challenged the honourable gentleman on when he was laying out his speech. And I drew attention to the fact that in the proposals in this paper, there wouldn't be a sponsorship role for employers, that enforcement mechanism wouldn't be there. There'd be no salary threshold. And the honourable gentleman pushed back on me and said that if that person chose to work elsewhere in the United Kingdom, that's where we would catch them out. But of course, what he's forgetting is there are many parts of the world, and I don't blame people particularly for doing this, because the United Kingdom is a very attractive country to come to. There are many parts of the world where many people wish to come here, and we stop them coming here because we don't issue them with a visa. Once they're in the country, it becomes quite difficult and very costly to remove them when they have no right to be here. They often work under the radar illegally. They often are then exploited potentially by rogue landlords. And also they come from countries where they may make an argument that they're claiming asylum, and that then means that we have to go through a very long, complicated process to demonstrate they don't have the entitlement to be here before we then have to remove them. And by not having sponsorship and not having that mechanism of employers with a track record of proven success in employing staff from overseas, he's throwing away that very significant enforcement mechanism and not just opening up that risk in Scotland, but opening up that risk in the whole of the United Kingdom. And that's one of the reasons why I don't find his proposals acceptable. The last but one point, of course I'll give way to my right honourable.
And would my right honourable friend agree that one of the points we should make to business is that if they invite in people at the low end of the income scale, there may be very large set-up capital costs in terms of extra social housing, school provision, health provision, and in-work benefits, which is a charge on the taxpayer, who ultimately means a charge on the British employers.
Well, I think my right honourable friend is exactly right. Now, let me just deal with my penultimate point, and that is, in the documents, there are a number of references, as I've said, to Canada and Australia, but it's very clear that because Canada and Australia both allow free movement around their countries, points are made in the Scottish Government's own document that there are very significant problems in retaining staff who've come in on these regional visas in the areas that they were supposed to stay, largely driven in both cases by the more attractive economic offers in other parts of the country. And so therefore it seems to me that one of the real challenges, given that he, I think, accepted that at the moment the present system is that there are more attractive economic opportunities for migrants in other parts of the United Kingdom than in Scotland. That was his own argument. It seems to me, I don't see anything in the document that suggests that the Scottish Government will be able to retain those migrants in Scotland. So the final point I would make, Mr Deputy Speaker, turning to the text of the motion, I think, if I may say so, the honourable gentleman and the party opposites got it the wrong way round. They've published a document and they've called on the Home Secretary to engage with them on those proposals. Now, it seems to me that, given the government hasn't yet set out its proposals in detail and they haven't been agreed by the Cabinet, a more sensible approach, I think, now that we have left the European Union and that battle is over for now, and I accept that until that happened, given the SNP's position on Brexit, that did make it quite challenging for them to accept it was happening. But now it has, I would argue that what they should do actually is to engage with the government, and my honourable friend, who I'm very pleased to see in his place, who opened the debate, made it very clear that his door was open, is actually for the party opposite to engage with both the Home Office and the Scotland Office to look at how the measures to be set out in our points-based system could actually, and I set one or two of them out in my remarks, best engage with the needs of Scotland. We're very keen that we have an immigration system that works for the whole of the United Kingdom, to make every part of our country more dynamic, increase the pay and opportunities for people across the United Kingdom. And if I may say so, I think that's the best way of proceeding. So I would suggest to the House, when the time comes later today, that it rejects the motion, but I would urge the party opposite to engage seriously with the government. And I know if they do so, they will find a listening ear and a willingness to engage on that basis, which I think is the best way for us all to move forward. Thank you, Mr Deputy.
Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I fear that sometimes in politics people oppose propositions for the wrong reasons. And I don't regard myself as being immune from this tendency, by the way, but quite often people are in their political bunkers and they have predetermined attitudes as to what a proposition means, and before someone even expresses a single word in support of a proposition, their mind is made up on the basis of who is actually making the argument. And I fear that this is one of these occasions where, no matter how convincing the arguments we put on this side of the bench, the government is not going to listen to them and they are going to fall on deaf ears. And I am saddened by that, because I think that is not a good way to approach such a serious subject. Now, let me be, and I think there are probably people opposite, I don't know if I would include the Minister in these ranks, who simply will reject any proposition on visa controls or anything else that comes to the Scottish National Party, because they would regard giving in or moving towards that position as being somehow the thin end of the wedge of Scottish independence, and therefore no quarter must be given. Let me be clear, of course, that on this, and just for the sake of clarity, these benches here are comprised of people who very much want Scotland to become an independent country which will have full and absolute control over all matters to do with nationality and the movement of people into and out of the country. I very much look forward to the day, and I hope it will not be too long ahead, where we can actually establish an immigration system in Scotland that gives people Scottish citizenship with a very generous attitude and encourages people to come and make their homes in our country from all corners of the globe. A country made up of first-class citizens rather than different attitudes being to different people depending on where they come from. But that's not where we are. That is not where we are, and it's not where we are in this debate, and it's not what is being proposed today. What is being proposed is a simple policy to have a work visa in one part of the United Kingdom because of very clear, overwhelming arguments in favour of it. And we have a situation, I could almost suggest, Mr Deputy Speaker, that a unionist-minded politician could be supporting many of the propositions that are contained within this. Because the purpose behind this is to try and make up, to deal with the consequences of Scotland being part of a centralised single state where economic planning, strategic economic planning in particular, is very much done from the centre, and where Scotland, the Scottish economy, risks becoming a peripheral regional economy in a much larger entity. We all know there are economic pressures that creates. I myself moved to this city in the 1980s for work. So did many other people I know. It's still happening today. This gravitation that comes and overheats the southeast of England, which is precisely why, Mr Deputy Speaker, a one-size-fits-all policy is not the answer to anything. Now, for the last 20 years or so, the Scottish population has been growing slightly, but only as a result of immigration to the country. Had it not been for that, the population would actually have been in decline. And for that period, up until the end of this year, we have been blessed in many ways by having access to the free movement of people across this continent, which has allowed many people from other European countries to come and make their home and live and work in Scotland. But now that is at threat of disappearance, it is all the more important that we address what sort of immigration system we have in the United Kingdom and whether Scotland, as part of that, is going to have its needs satisfied. And I would say that with the current proposals that are on offer, perhaps the honourable gentleman can enlighten me, but with what I know of the current proposals on offer, that is most definitely not the case. But I give way.
In force centralising Scotland and England and the rest of the Union in single economic policy is, of course, sharing a currency. So does the honourable gentleman now think that Scotland should leave the pound in order to have an independent policy? Because otherwise they would obviously be very dependent.
I'm not sure what the relevance of that question to the current debate, but let me answer him that we will not be too many years hence, I tell the honourable gentleman, until Scotland will be a strong and prosperous economy with its own currency, its own central bank, and punching well above its weight compared to what it is today. There are various arguments that have been put already from the benches against this proposal, which really don't hold water because they're not, in essence, arguments against what's being proposed. Well, let's see if there's another one before I start going through them.
Grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, and clearly the buoyancy of the economy and how it works would be either an attractor or to come to Scotland or not, if one wanted to be a migrant. But in that situation of independence, as I understand it, SNP policy is to rejoin the European Union, then surely and from the secondary position that is confirmed, then surely the currency of Scotland would be the euro.
Well, no, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. Nor is there any requirement for it to be so. Much as this is very much the season of dead cats, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm not going to respond to that one being thrown on the table. I'm going to focus on the arguments about having a Scottish visa. There are some arguments that have been put against this that I want to deal with. The first is this suggestion that somehow this is some sort of backdoor into the United Kingdom, and we're going to open up a portal through which lots of migrants are suddenly going to come to the shores of Britain, and then they are going to find their way to the honourable gentleman or the honourable lady's constituencies opposite and cause unknown terror for their constituents. Now, much as they might want to blow those dog whistles and whip up fears about immigration, that is not what is being proposed here. We are proposing a simple measure which could be enforced through as simple a mechanism as your national insurance number, where somebody has the right to seek employment and be employed and pay tax in Scotland, but not in any other part of the United Kingdom. What would happen if they decided they were going to get on the train and come and take a job in London? They would give their details over and their employer would be able to say, I'm sorry, we can't actually make this offer of a job because you don't have the requirements to work in this part of the United Kingdom. You only are validated for working in Scotland. Now, it might be said, oh well, but what would happen anyway if people just ignore that and somehow, unofficially or illegally, effectively, would go and seek work? Well, that could happen, but that could happen now. Yeah. This argument makes no difference to that actually happening. In fact, this is an argument for controlling the work permit situation within the United Kingdom to a much better extent than it is being done at the moment. And the other point that's being suggested here, and we've had this several times, is that somehow the proposals that we are making in these benches are an alternative to this grand, yet-to-be unveiled new immigration system that the United Kingdom is going to have. It's been said, I think, 4 or 5 times already in the debate, but members are deaf to these arguments. We are not saying this is a delete all and insert policy. We are saying that this is something that could be brought in addition to the United Kingdom procedures in order to provide for very particular circumstances that operate in Scotland. The other argument that's been thrown against this is, oh, well, why, what's so exceptional about Scotland? Why Scotland? There's other parts of the United Kingdom that you could make this argument to. There are, but probably not a whole country, and probably not a whole country where there already is a semi-autonomous devolved system of government and administration where it would be simple to actually bring these proposals in. And I say to members opposite, embrace this idea, because what if it worked? What if it actually worked? Then it would be an argument for having provincial government in England and for having differentiated systems that take into account that this is a large country with a very, very diverse economic needs in different parts of it. And if the members opposite and the government are serious about these platitudes they make about the north and investment and growth in the north of England, then this might be one of the vehicles that they could choose to actually deliver that. But excuse me, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The other thing is that this debate takes place in a context. I said at the beginning that we were not advocating Scottish independence. This is a very mild-mannered proposal, really, to try and cater for particular economic circumstances in Scotland. An additional power to a Scottish government which already has significant powers in many other related aspects of social policy. But understand the context in which we are having this debate. I know that you have the numbers, that they have the numbers, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to defeat this proposal in the lobby tonight. Everybody watching this debate knows that this government has got more votes throughout the United Kingdom than the Scottish National Party has. But understand this well. Whilst the Conservative Party has a mandate in most of the United Kingdom and in England in particular, it has no mandate whatsoever in Scotland. It was roundly defeated on the 12th of December at the general election in Scotland when people chose to send 80% of their representatives from this party, the Scottish National Party, to this place. And people are watching very carefully at debates such as this, because there is a clear desire and aspiration now in Scotland for people to be able to choose their own future, to be able to make a judgment as to whether the course that the United Kingdom has set by leaving the European Union and setting itself up in a fairly insular and isolated situation, whether that is the path that we wish to follow. And many people do not, and many people in particular, and now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, a clear majority of people would express the wish that we should choose a different path, an independent path where we control our own destiny, make our own decisions, make our own mistakes, and learn from them, because the people who live in that country, and only the people who live in that country, have got the right to determine how they are governed going forward. That is the sentiment which is growing now in Scotland. And much as the government may want to put its head in the sand and ignore that that's happening, I caution them to engage with public opinion in Scotland, because every time they refuse to do so, they simply fuel the appetite for change. They fuel the number of people who say, we don't want to put up with this anymore, we now look with fresh eyes at the alternatives on offer. And in many ways, the government so far since the election has been doing this party's job for it. The opinion polls are rising. More and more people in Scotland are demanding and getting behind the cause of independence, and we haven't even started the campaign. This is all the work of the United Kingdom government. And if you throw out sensible proposals like this one, which would be to the benefit of the Scottish economy, the benefit of the people in Scotland, but which might also be something very sensible to do whilst Scotland remains in the United Kingdom. If you throw this out and ignore the arguments that we are making, then you fuel that appetite and that desire even more.
Maiden speech. Miriam Cates.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, for allowing me to make my maiden speech. My interest in this place began when I was 11 years old and somehow I acquired an ancient long-wave radio that would only tune to Radio 4. So in the 1990s, before YouTube and Candy Crush, I had to make do with the Today programme and Westminster Hour. But I was hooked, captivated by the history of our democracy, the workings of our politics and its power to bring change. My first big political experience was the 1997 general election. Now, growing up in Sheffield, in what was the capital of the Socialist Republic of South Yorkshire, this was no ordinary election. I was fascinated by the whole campaign, and I sent off for and displayed posters from every single political party, including the referendum party. I even had a Liberal Democrat board on a post in our front garden.
Shame.
But we all make errors of judgment in our youth. Despite this early interest, I didn't become involved in party politics for another 2 decades, instead pursuing a teaching career, setting up a business with my husband, and spending rather a lot of time being pregnant and changing nappies. 5 years ago, I became a parish councillor, and I started to see the opportunities for elected representatives to bring real change. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, to cut a short story even shorter, I found my home in the Conservative Party, and I now stand before you as the Member of Parliament for Penistone and Stocksbridge. And apart from a 3-year stint at university, I have lived in the Sheffield area for my whole life, and so it is a profound privilege to represent a community that I call home. Penistone and Stocksbridge is a truly remarkable constituency. We have stunning scenery and moorland and reservoirs, beautiful rural villages like Bolsterstone, Wortley and Cawthorne. We have the historic market town of Penistone that received its market charter in 1290 and where Penistone Grammar School, founded in 1392, still provides an excellent education to local children. The school's original motto was Disce aut discede, which means learn or leave. This sentiment clearly held sway in the 2016 referendum, where the constituency judged the EU had failed to learn, and so we should indeed leave. The town of Stocksbridge, with its industrious history of steel manufacture, boasts the proud legacy of Mr Samuel Fox, inventor of the Paragon umbrella frame, and whose wire factories were responsible for the development of the town that we know today. We have many other wonderful communities like Dodworth, Pogmore, Chapeltown, Ecclesfield, High Green, Grenoside and Burn Cross, and numerous rural villages, each with their own unique character. 10 years ago, I moved to Uterbridge, one of these villages, and being until this point a city girl, I was utterly unaware of the strength and depth of community that I was about to encounter. Throwing myself into village life, I discovered voluntary groups, the school PTA, the local church, the parish council, bringing together people from all ages and all walks of life. The wonderful thing about a village, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that when everyone shares the same school, the same park, the same pub, it's natural to form friendships that are based on a common interest and a common geography, and not on social background or political worldview. And it was in my capacity as a parish councillor that I first met my predecessor, Angela Smith. I found her to be hard-working, sincere, thoughtful and helpful. And I want to thank Angela for the part that she played in securing an £8 million investment into the Fox Valley Shopping Centre, which has been responsible for significant regeneration in Stocksbridge and the surrounding area. In more recent times, Angela became known for her inclination to switch allegiances, being at different times during 2019 a member of no fewer than 5 political parties or groups. I'm heartily glad that the people of Penistone and Stocksbridge shared this enthusiasm for switching parties and in December elected me as their first Conservative MP. And on the topic of Scottish migration, perhaps the Scottish Government would want to offer a visa to any of my constituents who want to complete the set and experience representation by the SNP, although I feel sure they would only require a temporary visa. We've heard much about how we Conservatives won seats like Penistone and Stockbridge for the first time. And like my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, I understand that many people lent me their votes, and I take seriously my responsibility to deliver on the commitments that we made. One of the most important of these commitments is the pledge to radically improve public transport in the north of England. When I was first selected as a parliamentary candidate, I began by going around our communities asking people what changes they would like to see. Public transport was the issue that was raised time and time again. And this is why we so desperately need to level up our northern transport and infrastructure. Public transport is not just about getting people from A to B. Public transport connects people with well-paid jobs, with training and education, hospital appointments and shops, and it prevents loneliness and isolation. Transport is the key to spreading opportunity and investment, and that's why I'm campaigning with the Don Valley Railway Group to see our Stocksbridge to Sheffield passenger train line reinstated, and with the Thurgoland Parish Council Public Transport Working Group for better rural bus services. And I'm absolutely delighted by today's announcement around funding for buses and trains, demonstrating that this One Nation Conservative government really is committed to an ambitious programme of levelling up. But levelling up isn't just about financial investment, bricks and mortar, miles of train track. The national soul searching of the last 4 years has demonstrated that there are areas of our country, particularly northern towns like Penistone and Stocksbridge, that have been left behind. Not just left behind in an economic sense, although that is certainly the case, but left behind in terms of how our communities and our culture are understood and valued as part of our national life. I said before that I've lived in the area for my whole life, and that's by no means unusual. Our towns and villages are wonderful places to live, not least because of the strength and depth of community life. And social mobility should not mean having to leave your home, your family and your community to find work or training or investment. We do have ambition, aspiration and talent, but we are also rooted in a deep sense of place. We need opportunities right in the heart of our communities, and this government's initiatives like the Towns Fund and the Shared Prosperity Fund will help us to deliver. I want to finish where I started. A quarter of a century on from where my interest in this place began, I still believe that politics has the power to bring change, and that we should celebrate our history as a democratic nation. Not a perfect history by any means, and one with many dark moments, but a history where the trend has been towards progress and fairness. To continue this progress, we must begin to heal the very real divides that have been exposed between north and south, towns and cities, leave and remain, old and young. We need to find a way to recognise and value our differences while celebrating what we have in common as citizens of this great nation. However different our life experiences, our place of birth, our social background, we have a shared identity as human beings. Whether this identity derives from an acceptance of our intrinsic worth as people, or a belief like mine that we are all children of the same Heavenly Father, we need to cherish what we have in common. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are many different opinions in this country, and we have given each other many different labels. But the vast majority of us want to make this nation a better place for everyone who lives here. We may disagree, sometimes passionately, about how that should be done. But if we can respect each other's motives, leave the labels behind, be slow to judge and quick to forgive, then the healing will begin. December marked a fresh start for our democracy, a fresh start for Penistone and Stocksbridge. I'm honoured to serve this wonderful constituency, and I will work hard to deliver for all of my constituents.
Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd start by congratulating the Honourable Lady from Penistone and Stocksbridge. I have to say, listening to her describe our constituency, it could see it be tempting to perhaps look to take her up in the offer to look to secure a visa at some point in the future, but I have to say I'm a bit too attached to my own community, but others may look to take her up on that. Mr Deputy Speaker, thanks for calling to make this my first full contribution on returning to Parliament. If you would indulge me, I'd like to take a moment to recognise the contribution made by Danielle Rowley, whom I regained the Midlothian seat from last December. I know that while I may disagree with Danielle on many subjects, there are probably more areas in which we agree, none more so than wanting to see the best for our community of Midlothian. I know how tough it can be when the results don't go your way on election night all too well, not only for honourable members but for their staff teams, so I would wish Danielle and our former team very best for the future.
Well done.
Turning back to this afternoon's debate, we've heard from honourable friends many of the reasons why it's so vital that Scotland needs an immigration system that actually supports our economy and not one that stifles it. Unfortunately, we find ourselves with an imposed UK government that seems to care not one bit for what's in the best interests of Scotland, while perhaps that explains why they haven't actually won an election in Scotland since the 50s. The impacts of this narrow-mindedness from the government will indeed be significant for my constituency of Midlothian. We know that migrant workers are more likely to work in sectors such as retail, manufacturing, education, health and social care. These are all sectors of vital importance to the Midlothian economy. 19% of workers in Midlothian are employed in retail and wholesale, over 5% higher than the Scottish average. Food and drink alone contributes more than $7 million to the Midlothian economy. We also have a higher than average employment in the education sector and in manufacturing, sectors where we have long relied on international workers from the EU and elsewhere. So when we look at the approach taken by this government, which completely ignores the needs of Scotland, it's easy to see the catastrophic effect this could have in my community. Now, there also are a great many positive things happening in Midlothian. It's often said we're the fastest growing local authority in Scotland, and this may well be the case, but that brings with it real opportunities. According to research compiled for Skills Development Scotland, the largest contributing region to the Scottish economy in 2019 was Edinburgh, East and Midlothian, with a GVA of £26.6 billion, or 19% of the Scottish total output. From this, the fastest growth is in professional, scientific and technical activity sector, with an average growth rate of 3.3%. This includes life sciences. Now, I know some of you might wonder why this is such a big deal for a former mining community, but Midlothian is a local authority area in Scotland with the highest proportion of jobs in the life sciences sector. This includes the Midlothian Science Zone, the Roslin Institute, Morden, the Royal Dick School of Veterinary Medicine, Scotland's Rural College and the Edinburgh University Easterbush campus. At Easterbush alone, 26% of the workforce is from outside the UK. Employment in this sector has increased 12% over the last year across Scotland, with exports also increasing by 12%. This is a massive and growing success story, supported by smart policy from the Scottish Government. Yet while the Scottish Government seeks to drive forward our global competitiveness, barrier-building policies from this place are cutting the legs out from under us. The lack of willingness from this UK Government to even contemplate the proposals from the Scottish Government shows a contempt for the communities across Scotland, and they will pay the price for this narrow-minded intransigence.
Absolutely.
We were told to live in a union of equals, to lead, not leave, that we'd be pooling and sharing, all hollow rhetoric that we can now see through. But thankfully, Mr. Deputy Speaker, our communities do not need to be saddled with the destructive policies of yet another Tory government. Thatcher decimated the Midlothian communities when she obliterated the mining industry, and I'm certainly not going to stand by and watch as this government commits a modern-day equivalent. The people of Scotland and the people of Midlothian can follow another path, an independent path, and that day is coming, and it's coming soon.
Andrew Bowie.
Much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We have a problem in Scotland. I think everybody has recognised that. There's many problems in Scotland, most of them emanating from Holyrood, but that's for another day. As a country, we are simply not attracting enough people to Scotland to live, work or to invest. According to the Office for National Statistics, from 2016 to 2018, Scotland attracted on average only 8% of immigrants to the UK. That's less than the northwest of England for the same period, less than Yorkshire and the Humber, the West Midlands, east of England, the south east London and the south west. Oh, yes, I will, of course.
Give you, Honourable Gentleman, forgive me. Wouldn't you concede one of the problems is that when we do have migrants or migrant workers attracted to come to live in our communities, there are pen pushers at the Home Office that prevent them from coming. I'm thinking particularly of the fishing communities in the West Coast who are looking for non-European economic area labour to come, and for year upon year upon year, one person in Westminster usually says no, while the communities say yes.
This might surprise the House, but I actually do agree with the honourable member. Not to the extent of describing some of the hard-working civil servants we have in the Home Office as pen pushers. They're doing a very valuable job, but I do think we have to look more imaginatively at how we attract labour to sectors that need them and are crying out for them, particularly fisheries in the west coast of Scotland, which he ably represents in this House. We are a country, compared to what we previously were now, of in-migration. We have a growing population in Scotland. But it is a concern that if Scotland's economy is to continue to grow, we aren't, even with freedom of movement, attracting enough people to make up for what will soon become a declining population, through simple lack of natural growth, with deaths already outnumbering births. Last year there were already 7,000 more deaths than births in Scotland, and the problem is even more stark in rural communities. You know, there's not a country in the world that you travel to where the Scots have not left their mark. By virtue of being part of a larger United Kingdom, the door was open to Scots to travel the world, build, engineer, prosper in every corner of the globe. And that is a fact that, as Scots, we are incredibly proud of. I would be delighted to give way.
I'm very grateful for the honourable member giving way. I'm just wondering if, can he at least accept that there is a constant drain upon Scottish talent over the last 50-odd years of moving from Scotland to London, because, as in an earlier speech by my honourable friend for Edinburgh West, I believe, he pointed out that talent must move to London because that is where all the opportunity lies because of the policies that this place create.
Yet again, I don't disagree with the honourable member. I think it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that we encourage and do what we can to make the economy grow in Scotland, so we can keep talent north of the border, so that we can grow the economies in Aberdeenshire, where I represent, in Edinburgh and Glasgow, near where the honourable member represents. And I think that's for all of us to do, so that people don't feel they need to have to move out of Scotland to make a success. Yes, I'd be happy to give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Does he therefore regret the fact that it took just 20 minutes for the government to turn down the Scottish Government's proposal that was supported by so many stakeholders across Scotland and civic society?
If my honourable friend would have patience, I'm coming to that later on in my speech. Those that left, I will return to the subject of Scotland building the world, which of course is fantastic, but it did come, of course, with a price. Historically, Scotland was a country of out-migration and population decline, and whilst recent immigration, though by no means enough, as I've already spoken about, has reversed that trend, the legacy in some communities, particularly rural communities, remains. Rural communities did not just lose those who left initially, but also the generations who came, who would have come after. And representing a rural constituency, as I do, in the north east of Scotland, a part of the world dominated by the energy sector, meaning, thankfully, we have little problem with unemployment, but which brings, of course, its own problems, especially for rural industries, I am acutely aware of these issues. And that is why, as we complete the process of transition out of the EU, it is now more important than ever that we have a measured and reasonable debate at the future of our immigration system, particularly in terms of how it relates to Scottish agriculture. To put it simply, Scottish agriculture needs and relies on seasonal labour. It is vitally important, if we are to have this sensible and reasoned debate, as we actually are here in this chamber today, about immigration post-Brexit and Scotland, to recognise that the issues surrounding seasonal labour are not caused solely by Brexit. Just as Scotland has been, I would be delighted to give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. He brings up the issues that we have in agriculture, not just in Scotland, but around the UK in various different places like Lincolnshire and East Anglia. And the issue that I know very well that our honourable friend from Manhealy and Yar mentioned is an issue shared by the fishing communities of Northern Ireland. So is there any reason why a UK immigration policy cannot address all of these issues, particularly with the 59 representatives of Scottish seats in this place that all have a voice to help achieve that?
No, I don't think there is any reason why a UK-wide system could not address those issues. In fact, on the very issue of attracting talent to the fisheries sector, I have in fact written to the Secretary of State at the Home Office to ask if we could develop a similar process to the one we have for seasonal agricultural labour for those who want to engage in the fisheries sector. So no, there is absolutely no reason why we couldn't find a solution within a wider UK framework. Just as Scotland has been failing to attract many immigrants to settle in Scotland whilst being a member of the EU, so the number of seasonal workers willing to travel to Scotland to perform seasonal labour has been in decline for some years. Castleton Farm, for example, in my constituency, best jam bar none you'll ever taste, saw a 15% shortage of seasonal labour last summer, leading to an estimated loss of over 100 tonnes of produce. And this is whilst we still remain in the EU. In the same way we must look at why Scotland isn't attracting enough immigrants to stay in Scotland, we must also ask why Scottish farming isn't attracting enough labour. Part of the reason, of course, is that there is a labour shortage across Europe. Belgian, German and Irish farmers are increasingly sourcing their seasonal labour from outside the EU, chiefly from countries such as Ukraine. Non-EU seasonal labour is evidently part of the solution in Scotland, just as it is in agriculture in the remaining 27 states. Much of the decline in available European labour is, of course, down to the rapid and, of course, welcome progress that many Eastern European countries have made in developing their own domestic economies. And yet again, I'd be very happy to give way.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I can thank him for his earlier kind words. But can I also maybe put the political point on that the reason that Ireland can look further and can act upon its wishes is it has the independence to do so, which unfortunately our constituencies in Scotland and Scotland as a whole does not have that independence to make the decisions that Ireland are doing to get labour from the Ukraine when it needs it.
The honourable member obviously makes a very good point. However, as I said, in answer to the point raised by my honourable friend, the member from Banff-Buchan, there is no reason that we cannot address these issues as part of a wider UK immigration system. Those who want to work here and have other options apart from just Scotland, people that want to travel to work in agriculture have other options just in Scotland. And Scottish farmers have been in direct competition for currently available labour with French and German farmers for some time now, as well as with farmers from across the rest of the UK. And so I was pleased to see that this government, pledged to extend the pilot of the seasonal agricultural worker scheme to 10,000 workers a year, up from the current limit of 2,500, thanks to the lobbying and hard work of Scottish Conservative members of Parliament, I might say. This is a step in the right direction, and I hope it is a signal of intent, the beginning of a direction of travel. And I hope it also will be delivered in a timely fashion. It's critical that farmers have time to plan for next summer. To the wider issues about attracting people to work in states, I'd be happy to give way.
Go on, give them the
I'm very concerned that my honourable and constituency neighbour, Mr Deputy Speaker, is talking about the opportunity for farmers to prepare, because they're not for next year, it's this year that farmers are trying to prepare for. And also, he should indulge in a note of caution when he celebrates the increase to 10,000, because that figure is still patently insufficient. That's what the industry is telling us. Why won't government listen? Because an independent Scotland would listen.
Well, although disagreeing wholeheartedly with this point on an independent Scotland, what I would say is that I completely agree, and that's why I've called for the seasonal agriculture workers scheme to be increased. I think somewhere in the realms of 70,000 would be a reasonable number to put on it, and it's something else that I've asked the Secretary of State of the Home Office to comment on as well, and that's why I say that it was a direction of travel, and I hope it was a signal of intent that we're growing it from 2,500 to 10,000, and I hope they were able to grow it more over the next few years. On his point, preparing for this year, I would remind him that we still have freedom of movement at the minute. It's for next year, when we're outside and not having freedom of movement. I think farmers need to have certainty for and need to prepare. Did you? No. Yes, I would be happy to give way.
Thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I'm actually enjoying his speech. But he's believe it or not. But he's got to appreciate that some of the issues that he's raising are issues with issues in terms of labour shortages for this year, are issues because of Brexit and because people currently living in Europe don't feel welcome or certainly don't know if they are able to come here. So that message is not getting out to those who would still be able to come here this summer.
I thank the honourable member for her intervention. If people don't feel they are welcome here, or if they feel that they won't have certainty when they come here, that is a gross misrepresentation of the position of this government and a gross misrepresentation of the situation in this country. I think everybody in this chamber and across the country needs to show that our doors are open to anybody that wants to come here and contribute and work hard and play by the rules. And that's been the position of this government and this party for many years, and will continue to be so into the future. As I said, to wider issues surrounding attracting people to work and invest in Scotland, I don't think anybody in here on either side of the chamber of the House has all the answers. This government is committed to bringing in a points-based system that will attract people we need to these shores, whilst maintaining our commitment to always being the open, welcoming place this country has always been. That is the right thing to do. It's what we promised in our manifesto we would do, and of course we must deliver it. But we must think imaginatively about how we address specific issues in Scotland, and we must do so in a non-partisan and constructive fashion. And that is why I read from cover to cover the Scottish Government's paper, Migration, Making Scotland's Prosper. And actually, I found very little in that I could disagree with. I think it's a very useful contribution to the wider debate about how we deal with immigration in this country. It's an important debate, and of course it's one that we must get right. I do not think, however, that a separate Scottish visa is the right way to go for all of the complexities and challenges that it would bring. But I urge all of us in both of Scotland's governments to think imaginatively, work together, as we should do on quite a few other issues, so that we can find a solution and together, as a United Kingdom, prosper. Thank you very much.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'm glad to follow the honourable member from West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, because he had some interesting points to make, and while we disagree on how those issues might be resolved, it's certainly interesting to hear his views. And as the member for Glasgow Central, I have, I believe, the highest number of constituents of any constituency in Scotland not born in the UK. And I was doing some totting up from the members on the Tory benches who have just spoken. And actually, I have at 21,283 from House of Commons Library figures, I believe from the 2011 census, actually more people not born in the UK in my constituency than the 5 speakers on the Tory benches put together. So I will take no lessons on the value of immigration to my constituency from people who have so little and so few concerns raised, I'm sure, at their surgeries. Because at my surgeries, Mr Deputy Speaker, week in, week out, I have people in tears at my surgeries. People in tears because of the way this UK government and the Home Office has treated them. They have been treated without respect. They have been treated in an arbitrary fashion, and they have been treated quite cruelly for many, many years. So something has to change, Mr Deputy Speaker. And this is a small proposal from the Scottish Government to mitigate some of that damage and some of the reasons why I support independence, because I don't want to have people go through what my constituents go through at the hands of the UK Government. Because have no doubt, Mr Deputy Speaker, the SNP believe that immigration is a good thing. We're a country that has suffered, as the honourable member for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine said, from immigration over many, many years, of our people leaving and going to other countries. So we really have no right, I say, to deny people the chance to come and make their home in Scotland and do us the privilege of making their lives here. And not only is this UK Government's policy on immigration immoral in many ways, it actually makes no economic sense in many ways. As we are all aware, Scotland has an ageing population. We need to grow our population to keep our economy afloat and to help people have a decent standard of living in old age. Now, the Tories have decimated support for families and actively discourage people from having more children through policies like the 2-child limit and the rape clause. So the only other option really remains is to encourage migration. But they haven't done that either, instead imposing arbitrary targets on migration over the years. And this is sheer economic illiteracy and completely unsustainable. And honourable members opposite have talked about attractiveness. Now, we are fighting this battle about attractiveness with one hand behind our back. Because the hostile environment, the go-home vans, the way in which the Home Office has approached its policies, we can only do our best to try and mitigate that.
We can only do our best to say, no, Scotland actually is a welcoming country, and we want you to come, and we want you to stay. And for the Honourable Member for Forest of Dean, who has 3,014 non-UK citizens, to tell me that my constituency and my country is unattractive is quite frankly insulting. And unless some substantial changes are made to Scotland's ability to encourage immigration, we are looking at a ticking demographic time bomb for the future. And Mr Deputy Speaker, average earnings in Scotland are less than £24,000 a year, but the immigration salary threshold is £30,000. And what is this a measure of exactly? It's certainly not a measure of how much a person is valued, or the workers and the care nurses and hospitals, how precious they are to their family, or social care workers, and how valuable they are to our future. So I would say it is shameful that any arbitrary value has been put on the value of people who come to choose and build their lives here, but also that arbitrary target is above what can be reasonably earned by a skilled worker. And I had a constituent came to my surgery fairly recently who works by day as a mortgage advisor in a bank, a fairly good, high-profile, skilled job, one would imagine. He worked at night as a shelf stacker in a supermarket, and he was working all the hours that he could get so that his wife and his son could come and live in Scotland. Now, he shouldn't be wearing himself absolutely done to do that. He's doing a good job that is valuable, that we think is important to society. But that's not how he felt. That's not how he felt. He felt as though he was doing everything he could against a system that didn't even care, that didn't even value him. And I get that time and time again at my surgeries. Absolutely.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I do thank the member for giving me, and I'm listening to, with great interest, what is a very well thought out speech. The honourable member and members will recall that some months ago I unwittingly invited the former Prime Minister to accompany me to a hotel in the Highlands. While laughter overtook the chamber, the point I was making was that the hotel business and the tourism businesses in the Highlands depend on migrant workers. And that was a problem then, and I suspect it will be a problem now. And I just want to put that on the record because we need to remember that.
He's absolutely correct, and as a member of the All-Party Group on Hospitality, I would agree very much that that sector needs to have people coming in here to do those jobs, and that we value them as well, because not only do they bring the skills in our restaurants, our catering services, they actually bring their food as well, and we enjoy that food, and we should thank them rather than making them feel unwelcome. And specifically to people in the care sector and the issues that they face. Now, I had a couple came to see me on the 16th of December 2015, and they had worked in care homes and were very much valued in the care home that they worked in. And they were then at the point of working in that care home voluntarily because the Home Office had rescinded their right to work. And they had a son who they were putting through school. And over the next 5 years, because they came to see me at my surgery on the 13th of January, and they came to see me at that surgery to say, finally, after all of that time and all of those years, they had finally been granted their status. They were looking forward to going back to work in that care home because that care home had kept the faith that we would eventually get the chance to work and be paid for it. And over that time, over that period of many years, they were hosted by volunteers from Positive Action in Housing, they were supported by the British Red Cross, they were supported by their solicitors, McGlash and Mackay, they were supported by a range of services who provided them with food for free, who provided them with food banks, who provided them with other things. They'd come to my office to get school uniforms for their growing son. Over that time, they were destitute, Mr Deputy Speaker. What does that say to that family? That they want to come here, they want to work hard, they are in a valuable role, but the Home Office says no. The Home Office says, no, actually, we don't need you. When we know that we do. We know that we need people in the care sector. And here we have a couple who are dedicated their life to caring, being told that they can't do that. So I have no confidence in the UK Government to make the changes required that will allow constituents like these to manage their lives and to be a success and to feel welcome in this country. I'll absolutely give them that.
Can I echo the calls, the point from the member from Keith and Sutherland says a well thought out speech, and also can echo his point about the hotels and, as she said herself, the care sector. But at the heart of this debate is surely the point of the one-size-fits-all approach the UK Government takes. It doesn't do what Switzerland does. It doesn't do what Canada does. It thinks Whitehall and Westminster knows best, when in actual fact in the West Highlands we've got needs, in Glasgow they've got needs, and we need to have a decentralised policy, not a policy that suits the headline writers of the Daily Mail, but a policy that suits Scotland.
My old friend is absolutely right, and his constituency in many ways could not be any more different to mine. but the needs are not being catered for by the Home Office in any way whatsoever. And we've been expecting an announcement from the Government on what this new post-Brexit immigration policy will look like, and there's been lots of speculation that the system will be an Australian-style points-based system, but no acknowledgement of the fact that Australia's system actually allows for a degree of autonomy for territories to decide their own criteria for migration and the ability to adjust the policy to their own diverse needs. No acknowledgement either that the Australian system is actually much more generous than the system that we have here just now. And no acknowledgement either that in her first speech after she demitted office as Prime Minister, the Honourable Member for Maidenhead got up and said pretty much to the Home Office, "Good luck, we looked at it." So I wish him all the best of luck in actually trying to establish a system which does not have the evidence here to back it up. And we in these benches have long called for a separate immigration policy for Scotland, and long been told by the UK Government that of course it won't work. We don't believe them on that, as with so many other things, because research from the Fraser Allender Institute and the David Hume Institute has not only shown that it would work, but it is vital if Scotland is going to meet the demographic challenges of the future. It's not good enough for the UK Government to take this one-size-all-fits approach when there are real pressing concerns in Scotland. And if they won't take action to address this issue, then maybe they should allow the people of Scotland to decide for themselves who they want to be in charge. And I want to highlight just a couple of cases from my recent casework, Mr Deputy Speaker, if you'll indulge me and you'll allow. I want to highlight the issue of no recourse to public funds. And the Scottish Government in their budget last week said that they're going to look to set up some means of addressing the issue of no recourse to public funds. And that goes to the issue that the Honourable Member for Forest of Dean said, that people are not allowed to access the benefits system in any way. Now, I had a woman who had been coming to my surgeries for many years. She was number 3 on my books after the election in 2015. And she was working hard in a low-paid role. She was doing everything that she could, but because she had no recourse to public funds, she was just about managing the rent, she was just about managing her electricity, but she couldn't buy Christmas presents or school uniforms or have put food on the table. Now, that's not fair, Mr Deputy Speaker, because she is doing everything that she can, but yet because of no recourse to public funds, she cannot do anything about that. And the Home Office is sneaky on this as well, because every time somebody tries to find a workaround for no recourse to public funds, the Home Office promptly shuts it down. Now, the Scottish Government wants to help. The Scottish Government does not want people to face destitution, and it is immoral and wrong that the UK Home Office decide that they want to make people destitute and they want to make people struggle so hard that they want to leave this country in poverty. So I want to also mention a particular case of a constituent who came to me. Now, I don't want to mention names, Mr Deputy Speaker, because it is quite sensitive, but this man is a local imam. And his wife had complications in her birth and lost 17 litres of blood and was transfused during a horrific ordeal in her pregnancy. They applied for his mother to come over and support her after the birth because she was in desperate need. And because of the parental leave issues, the imam had to go back to work. The Home Office refused that reasonable visitor's visa. There is a lack of compassion that runs through the Home Office and prevents people from getting visitors' visas on very reasonable grounds. And I see this, Mr Deputy Speaker, week in, week out. People desperate, people broken, people sad. People who want to show off Scotland in their new home. And the Honourable Members have talked about not being welcoming enough. The visitor visa system, which refuses people for no reason whatsoever, other than the fact that they come from a country where people are brown, is a system that cannot stand and must stop. And the Honourable Member shakes his head. He can come and sit in my surgery, and he's looking about. Yeah, you know who you are. The Honourable Member for Money shakes his head. He can come and sit in my surgery, and he can listen to the people that come to my surgeries from particular countries who get refused visitor visas time and time again.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm sure the Honourable Lady didn't mean to mislead the House, but I can assure her I did not move my head in any way. I'm listening intently to both her speech and the cases she's raising, and I think it would be wrong to mislead both the House and people watching to suggest I did otherwise.
He moved his head, perhaps he wasn't shaking it. But it certainly didn't look to be taking on the points that I raised. And the point that I make is this. That not all constituencies are the same. And perhaps I could forgive those in the Tory benches who do not have constituencies that look like mine, who do not have surgeries that feel as desperate and as sad as mine. And I invite them to come and sit in these surgeries if they want to, if they're willing to, if they're bold enough to. Because they need to know that this system as it stands just now does not work. It doesn't work for people, it doesn't work for businesses, it doesn't work for the economy, at large. And if they're telling me that they know better than my constituents, I'm just finishing up, if they're telling me that they know better than the experience of my constituents every week at my surgeries, then they're wrong. And if the Labour Party are telling us that it'll all be fine if we just wait for an indeterminate period of time until they come back into office and that things will be better, I'm sorry, but I don't believe that either, and I don't think that's good enough. So I ask, Mr Deputy Speaker, how long should my constituents have to put up with this? Would it not be better if we had the full powers of a normal independent nation and we could support ourselves and decide who is worthy of coming into our country and doing us the honour of making Scotland their home?
Simon Hall.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady, the member for Glasgow Central, who whilst I don't think I would have agreed with everything that you said, Mr Deputy Speaker, you won't be surprised by that. Whenever she does speak in this place, the sincerity and the affection that she has for her constituents, and clearly the work that she does on their behalf, shines through with every word that she says. And whilst I'm feeling in a magnanimous mood, could I also congratulate, for what it's worth, coming from me, the Honourable Lady, the member for Streatham, who is new to the front bench, who gave, I thought, a very compelling speech and was very professionally delivered. Of course, it paled into, in comparison to my honourable friend, the member for Penistone and Stocksbridge, in her maiden speech, which the House was interested to hear, but she's not that interested to hear what I've had to say about her. But there we are. That's the benefit of making a maiden speech. A number of honourable members opposite have referenced the MAC, the Migration Advisory Committee. And I have to say, if I had my way, I would abolish the MAC. In the same way that I would either abolish or certainly ignore the organisation called Migration Watch. I think neither of them are actually anywhere on pace when it comes to the needs that our country, as a united country, faces when it comes to migration. And I think it is perfectly proper in a post-EU membership age that our immigration policies to meet all quarters of the United Kingdom are forged in this place by ministers, scrutinised by this House and approved. And then they can change. And there should be receptiveness and fluidity within whatever system we alight upon in order to meet the needs of our country. I'll give way to him.
I'm very grateful, Honourable Gentleman, for giving way, and I could maybe double underline what he said about the Migration Advisory Committee, who opine on all various levels of skill, and we've challenged them. If they think that skilled workers to come and work in fishing boats aren't that skilled, would one of them from the Migration Advisory Committee care to go out in a fishing boat and show us how unskilled the job was? We have yet to see one of them after a number of years.
I agree with the Honourable Gentleman. That is why, and I welcome wholeheartedly what certainly appears to be the mood music coming out of number 10 from my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, that a scant regard is going to be paid to their advice of a salary threshold, because I think it is entirely immoral to put a value on a person principally predicated on what they earn. There are thousands of people, millions of people in this country doing work which is vitally important. Members across the House have referenced them, whether it's in agriculture, hospitality, social care, the National Health Service, who some of those jobs will be skilled, some of them will not be skilled, but they are absolutely vital. I always think to myself that the skilled Nobel Prize winner or great scientist coming up with some whizzy thing that needs to be said needs the person on, in the dispatch department to sort of pack it up and send it out, and make sure that the factory or the laboratory is clean. A functioning economy is a network, is a spider's web of different skills at different pay grades of different people, all making a contribution. And of course I'll give way.
I'm very grateful, Honourable Gentleman, for giving way again. He's been very generous. And another point on the excellent point he's raised about the salaries is, again, it is a centralisation of thinking, because we know that average salaries are not the same across Scotland, and I'm talking for Nahilling and Near, as well as other places. And then they're different again for where the policy is set in London or for Manchester or for Birmingham. So the idea of salaries being uniform across the United Kingdom is clearly a very nutty idea, and I'm glad to hear that's going.
The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right, and of course it's not just the regional and county variations, but also actually the spending power that salary will get you. £20,000 earned in North Dorset is going to get you far more than it would get if you were living in, I don't know, North Westminster or North Harrow.
Or Chelmsford.
Or Chelmsford, says the honourable my honourable friend, the member for Chelmsford. And he's right, absolutely, to make that point. I mean, if you take, for example, I think, Mr Deputy Speaker, my figures are correct, but the annual take-home salary, on average, is now £24,500. In North Dorset, it is £18,500. Huge variations in what is just 122 miles from this place to the edge of my constituency. Will he forgive me? I know other members wish to speak. Now, I would understand the motivation that sits behind this motion if it looked as if the government was going to be moving to some sort of draconian, Trumpian suite of immigration policies. And I would suggest, from all that I hear and listen to, that nothing could be further from the truth. I'm convinced that my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has the most liberal of instincts and global of outlooks when it comes to immigration. One need only look to the time when he was Mayor of London as an example of that to prove it as a practical example than merely just a theoretical proposition. So I don't see the need for, I don't see the desirability for, and I'm unconvinced by the deliverable workability of this separate approach to immigration, whilst accepting it is an add-on rather than an instead of, which this motion advocates. I get that. I understand that. But given the fact that all of the noises coming from Downing Street are that we want to have, and Downing Street, both numbers 10 and 11, is that we want to have a suite of immigration policies that is rapidly responsive to economic needs, whether it's Northern Ireland, whether it's Scotland, whether it's England, whether it's North Dorset. I would suggest to members opposite, that at this stage in the proceedings, there is nothing to worry about. There are concerns, of course, that we want to make sure that those policies are delivering upon, but I don't think we need to worry about them just yet. Mr Deputy Speaker, could I just make, with the indulgence of honourable members opposite, whose motion this is, may I just make a general point? In 2015, when many of us came into the House at the same time, I spoke in the second reading of the Scotland Bill from almost this position on this bench. And the circumstances were similar. The SNP had done fantastically well in that general election, and they had a spring in their step. Those of us who are unionists, Mr Deputy Speaker, do need to reflect upon those results and calibrate a persuasive narrative to underpin, revitalise, to reaffirm the benefits, as we see them, as the maintenance of the United Kingdom. To be a unionist is not to be anti-Scottish. To be anti-separatist is not to have a grudge against the Scottish people. It is not to try and slam all of the doors to Scottish aspiration merely because we think separation is wrong. I am very pleased, I'm honoured, in fact, to call very many members on those benches my friends. And very often, if I'm talking to constituents in North Dorset, they will often ask, well, what is it like with the SNP? And when I say, I don't always say the good guys, but I say, do you know what? Don't judge politics on what can often be those fractious discourses taking place on the floor, because we'll have an argument here and temperatures get a bit heated and blood pressure goes up, but outside in the members' lobby, in the tea room, in the members' dining room, wherever it might happen to be, I won't say everything is, friendship and honeymoon music, but it's a lot better. It's a lot better. It's not far off, he says, but it's a whole lot better than often this chamber, Mr Deputy Speaker, allows people to think. Well, if the honourable, I don't know which the honourable gentleman is offering me. I'm I'm rather worried to give way, but just in the interest of curiosity, which I know killed the cat, of course I'll give way to him.
Talking of the Sunshine and Honeybean music there, I was listening to his impassioned case and plea for unionism. But when he looks over the last century and he now sees the Republic of Ireland being the independent state it is, doesn't he sort of think maybe Scotland could do just as well or a little bit better if it could make its own decisions, as we mentioned earlier on immigration, that Ireland can do, as well as a raft of other decisions, rather than having them made by a government that we haven't voted for, a party we haven't voted for since 1955?
As far as I'm concerned, it's not whether Scotland could or couldn't do the job. There is an advanced, deep political skill set, there's developed civic society, there's academia and all this. I'm not going to be the first SNP member for Dorset, don't worry. It's a tempting offer, but I'm going to have to decline it. So, in terms of the theory, could it be done? Of course. I'm a Welshman. I am a Welshman. Could Wales go it alone? In theory, yes. But all because something is feasible doesn't necessarily make it desirable. All because science can doesn't necessarily mean, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that science has to. Deep within my DNA is a belief that the four quarters of the United Kingdom, through acts of history and politics and religion and shared interest and language and war and defence of values, are better and stronger and are a more potent force for good in the world, standing together. I don't say that to be offensive to Scottish members. I don't say that to offend residents and fellow citizens of Scotland. It's just deep within my DNA. And I hope, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the House won't find it either too schmaltzy or too amusing if I say that, and very often this is exchanges in this place where a number of us feel put off or inhibited from treading into the choppy and potentially dangerous waters of these debates. But we do so with a feeling sometimes of foreboding, but also, actually, and this may be the word that generates some titters, I don't know, but I can't speak for all of my colleagues, but as a unionist, and I've explained why I'm a unionist, I get personally upset when some on those benches, for reasons best known to themselves, seek to portray my unionism as being anti-Scottish. I would never portray their proud nationalism as being either anti-English or anti-Welsh or anti-British. It is simply a different set of value sets which take you to a particular judgment. And you can be pro-something, vehemently pro-something, Mr. Deputy Speaker, without being anti, per se, the alternative which is on offer. So whether it's migration, whether it is the dusts and sands settle in this post-EU membership world, let us at least say to all of our constituents, whether they are in the north of Scotland, in the north of Dorset, or wherever it may happen to be, that we can engage in those debates in a vigorous, respectful and friendly way. Let us make sure that our motivations on this side of the House are not portrayable as the narrow bigotry of some caricature of Little England. That belies our motivations, it belies our beliefs. It has a negative impact on this place. And I think if our constituents expect anything from us, particularly after the last 3 years, they are expecting all of us to put our shoulders to the wheel to try to raise the quality, the tone and the temper of our political discourse as we engage in our passionate arguments.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. From the midst of the choppy waters, I have some life rafts. When the Migration Helping Scotland Prosper report was published by the Scottish Government, my colleague, the Honourable Friend, my Honourable Friend, the member for Edinburgh West, stated that as a result of the work of the Scottish Affairs Select Committee, it was clear that the immigration needs of Scotland would be best met on a sectoral rather than a geographical basis. The Scottish Affairs Committee was told that the UK can vary visas for different areas and sectors under existing laws, and I therefore urge the Government to use these powers in consultation with the Scottish Government. Agriculture is a key sector within my constituency of North East Fife, which relies on a migrant workforce throughout the year and particularly at peak harvest times. The NFU estimates that 80,000 people are required to harvest crops across the UK each year, and a good proportion of this workforce is mobile, moving from location to location throughout the season. Borders within the UK potentially create barriers to work for such individuals. Our departure from the EU is already impacting on farmers' ability to recruit staff, so we should be doing all we can to mitigate these difficulties rather than potentially exacerbating them. The need for visas for non-EEA nationals to crew fishing boats is acute in Cornwall as it is in the East Neuk and elsewhere in Scotland. The Scottish Government's migration report states the following: the current UK immigration system is complex and consists of a number of different routes and visas for work and study in an unclear system of tiers, alongside a restrictive approach to family migration. I agree. That's why we proposed an amendment to the motion that focused on the failings of the current system and the creation of the hostile environment that impacts people across the UK, and the need to develop a system that treats everyone with dignity and respect. Yesterday, I was approached by one of my constituents. He'd previously sought the support of my predecessor, Stephen Gethens, and I thank Stephen for the support he gave to them. Valentina Yakovleva is a Ukrainian national who lives in my constituency with her son-in-law, Andrea, her daughter and their 2 children. She moved to the UK in 2010 at the age of 60 and has lived with her family in my constituency since then. After her travel visa expired, she should have been eligible for a family reunification visa, for she had no surviving spouse. She applied through a law firm based in Dundee for this visa, with the family making the assumption that it would be granted. She has spent this last decade raising her 2 granddaughters. Andrea, her son-in-law, told me that he would not have been able to work if his mother-in-law hadn't been looking after their daughters. Andrea sadly lost his job in 2015, but is now close to qualifying as a student teacher, thanks to Valentina's help. But, following errors in her initial application and a failed appeal, Valentina faces deportation back to Ukraine. She was held in the detention centre at Dungavel in South Lanarkshire, following her arrest by the police in Fife, and was then held away from her family for 2 weeks before being released on bail following a judicial review. Now she has been given 2 options: to leave the UK now, voluntarily, with the prospect of returning for visits only after a period of a year, or to be forcibly evicted from the UK and be unable to return for 5 years. I find this utterly appalling. Valentina is nearly 70, the same age as my own mother, who likewise supported me with care for my children in their early years, and indeed she still does. She has lived in this country for a decade. She's helped raise her grandchildren, allowing her son-in-law to contribute to society, to the economy and to pay taxes. She now faces being sent to a country where she has no family, no property and no prospect of employment. And in addition, she has a number of health issues that she needs support with. This is what her son-in-law has said: the Ukraine is no place to be sending her back to. She has no family there, and her pension was frozen around 7 years ago, with no prospect of her ever having access to it. She is our family, she has brought up our children, and has been part of our community for almost a decade. Sending her back will be an absolute breach for human rights and devastating for all of us. I agree. This is a total breach of Valentina's human rights, causing untold anxiety and distress. Mr Deputy Speaker, I think cases like these are a black mark against our society. Firstly, I ask the Minister to intervene in this case. Clearly, to support Valentina sending her somewhere where she has no family, has not lived for a decade, has no prospect of finding a job and puts her health at risk is totally unacceptable. We should aim to be judged on how we treat the most vulnerable people in our society. We are failing Valentina and many others like her. As a newly elected MP, it's incredibly worrying to see the clockwork regularity of constituents contacting my office because they or their family face deportation, because their visas have not been processed or because their settled status has not been granted, and other members have referred to that today. You don't have to be a Member of Parliament for long for it to be clear, if it wasn't already, that our immigration system is not working. It's not fair. Yes, I will give way.
I think the Minister is trying to catch eye as well, so she may want to go back to the Minister afterwards. I agree with pretty much everything the Honourable Member is saying, and I think if we were to devise an immigration system that we thought would work for our respective communities, they wouldn't be that different. But I'm wondering when she's going to explain why she wants us to support the Lib Dem amendment and to wipe out the whole of the motion that the SNP have put forward. Of course, she's asking us to wipe out condemnation of the government's response to the Scottish Government White Paper. She's asking us to delete the bits that says we welcome the support that we've had from across Civic Scotland. She's even asking us to delete a part that says that the Home Secretary should engage positively with the Scottish Government before introducing the immigration bill. If she wants the House to support the Lib Dem amendment tonight, could she explain why she wants to delete all of those parts out of our motion instead of adding them to what she's put forward herself?
Order. Before the Honourable Lady comes back into the debate, can I just advise her gently that the amendment was not selected and therefore really shouldn't really be referred to in any depth during this particular debate. Thank you.
So, yes, I'm aware my amendment was not selected, and all I would say is that although there was support there from civic bodies across Scotland, it was support for the debate to be started rather than necessarily for the proposals. So, all men... Yep.
Thank her for giving way. I'll keep this fairly brief. If she wishes to supply myself and my officials with the detail of the case, I'll be happy to look into it.
Thank you very much for that, and I will follow up with that. Thank you. So, I'm certain that every member of this House is a Valentine in their constituency, and all members must be aware of the scale of this problem. Yesterday was further proof when members from all sides of this House contributed to the second reading of the Windrush Compensation Scheme Expenditure Bill. We heard again and again of the inhumane treatment of ordinary people just trying to go about their lives. 3 weeks ago, the other place returned a number of amendments to the withdrawal agreement back to this House, one of which required the Home Office to provide physical documentation to evidence EU nationals' right to remain in the UK as part of the settled status scheme. Is it any wonder that those who come to live, work and contribute to this country do not have any confidence in the current processes and therefore require physical evidence? We as a collective are the lawmakers. We could change this, but it will require political willpower on all sides. I hope we can all agree, and there's been an element of consensus in the debate this evening, that when we're talking about immigration, the question should be, what do we need to do to create an immigration system in which every person has their dignity respected? A system which is compassionate and effective, a system which works both for ordinary people and UK employers, a system which works for Scotland and Wales and England and Northern Ireland. And so I thank the SNP for using this opportunity to highlight the failings in the immigration system. For our immigration system is broken for the whole of the UK. Trying to fix the system on a geographical basis is, however, not the answer and only serves to fracture the complex processes that currently exist further. We need an immigration system which treats people with humanity, and we need a system that works for the whole of this country.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it's a pleasure to be called to speak in this debate because it's an incredibly important one. Indeed, it's one of the defining issues of Scotland's future going forward. And I don't say that lightly. And I think it was the Honourable Member for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine who reflected upon one of the reasons as to why it is such a huge issue for Scotland. In want of a better phrase, we do have a situation where we face a demographic time bomb. We are very fortunate that we have so many older folk who are living longer and longer, but our working age population is indeed decreasing. Now, there's two obvious solutions to that. The first solution would be for people to have more babies, lots of them, and very soon. But obviously nobody can elicit any control in that regard, Mr Deputy Speaker. But where we do have control is in relation to immigration. And what currently faces us is a UK government which has nothing but hostility towards migrants coming into this country. Now, we heard from the Honourable Member for North Dorset that we should wait and see, and I think the exact phrase was, there's nothing to worry about. Well, from my position, there's a lot to worry about, and if we listen to the remarks of the Honourable Member for Glasgow Central, or indeed what we've just heard from the Member for North East Fife, the record of this government when it comes to migration is utterly appalling. It is disgusting the manner in which people have been treated. Now, I'm sorry if I'm not going to stand here and say that things, and accept the fact that just because Conservatives say things are going to get better, they are going to get better, because I simply do not believe it. The evidence says the complete opposite. Now, as we look at what the government is seeking to do moving forward, we've heard, obviously, from number 10 and indeed number 11, that the outlook is for an Australian-style point system. But as has been pointed out by my colleagues in the chamber here this evening, the Australian system, if you look at it in its totality, allows for regional visas. Now, the reason it allows for regional visas is to ensure that they have a system that meets the needs of all the different areas of that country. So when I asked the Minister just... Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Is the honourable member aware that the evidence given to the Scottish Affairs Committee in the last Parliament was that there is room within the current UK legislation and within the Home Office to differentiate about visas for different parts of the country, that there are actually regionally based visas available in this country?
Well, I thank the member for her contribution, but I think what we need to see going forward is the UK government putting in place processes that ensure that regionality exists. And, you know, when I asked the government minister just yesterday whether this was something that he would look at, because Australia's talked about in such glowing terms, indeed the government fawns over Australia, his answer was no. And when my colleague, the honourable member for Edinburgh South West, asked a very similar question in relation to Canada, the exact same answer was forthcoming. No. Yet Australia, as I've mentioned, is the beacon that we need to be looking at. But when it comes to looking at the entire system in Australia, we seem to be awfully selective about where we want to go. And the reason, the justification that the members opposite put forward in relation to that, we heard some of them earlier, is in relation to this artificial, mythical concept of creating a border on this island. But as we've rightly heard from my colleagues earlier in the debate, Ireland manages to get on just fine. Indeed, the members opposite will be aware that their government is working incredibly hard to ensure that there's frictionless movement on the island of Ireland, and rightly so, incidentally. So why is it good enough for Ireland, but it cannot be achieved on this country? Why would there need to be a border on these isles? I would respectfully suggest that the only people who are interested in borders in that regard are indeed the members opposite. Because what we have put forward and what the Scottish Government is seeking to discuss is a regional visa that is frictionless and allows for Scotland to benefit. And that's something that we should all be incredibly supportive of. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, with your indulgence, I would just like to reflect upon some of my further concerns about what is coming forward through what the government is seeking to do. Now, we heard from one of the members opposite earlier that the threshold might now no longer be £30,000 per year in order to have a salary. It's going to be reduced to £25,000. Well, I don't know about all the members opposite, but quite frankly, £25,000 is still well out of the reach of so many individuals living and working in Scotland at this moment in time, be they in the NHS, be they in the care sector, be they in our hospitality sector, our agricultural sector, or indeed our fish processing sector. So what is being proposed is simply not viable for Scotland's needs, and that is ultimately at the crux of our debate. And there's one particular point I would like to pick up on, and that's the hospitality sector. Earlier this week, I think it was on Monday afternoon, there was a debate in Westminster Hall in relation to beer taxation and beer duty, and I think there was more government members there for that debate than what there is here today. But at that debate, they were chastising their government for the fact that beer duty is too high and they want it down in order to keep local pubs open. And I think there's a consensus that there needs to be reform in that regard. But if you look at Scotland, 11.5% of our hospitality workers are non-British nationals. So we may well have a situation where where we have these cheaper pints, but ultimately there's not going to be the folk there to serve them. Now, in Scotland, that might be the self-service mechanism in Scotland might be something that goes down a treat. But in all seriousness, that is the reality of the situation that's facing us. You know, the Press and Journal, the local newspaper up in my part of the world, reported last year that there was a pub or a local facility in the town centre known as the Tipling House, a wonderful place, I might add. But 60% of their staff are non-British nationals. And without knowing the detail, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would respectfully suggest that very few, if any of them, will be reaching the thresholds that this government are promoting. So what is to become of establishments like that? What is to become of the hospitality sector in Scotland as a whole? Indeed, what is to become of the public sector? Because after all, we know in the likes of Aberdeen City Council, I would declare that I am indeed still a member of Aberdeen City Council, that around 12.9... Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. I'm fascinated by the honourable member's point. I think it's a very good point. In my constituency and in Edinburgh as a whole, 50% of the hospitality workforce come from actually other parts of the European Union. And I know as a member of the Scottish National Party, you will have valued freedom of movement as I did. Can he see that perhaps many of us fear that imposing separate visas for different parts of the United Kingdom, rather than for a sector like, say, tourism, would limit the freedom of movement within the UK and would actually be a hamper to improving and encouraging people to come and work here rather than help it?
I would thank the honourable member for her contribution, but I think we've stumbled upon language which has been the problem throughout this debate, and that is the notion that what we're proposing is a separate visa. The reality is that what we're proposing is additionality, so that the needs of Scotland can be met. And Madam Deputy Speaker, it's on that point that I just want to finish up my contribution to the debate here this evening, because the reality is that what the Scottish Government have put forward has been done in good faith. We want to have a system that is to the benefit of Scotland and to all of our collective futures. It is simply despicable that this Government dismissed that out of hand in the space of just 20 minutes, particularly when on page 20 of that paper, at points 1, 2, 3 and 4 in terms of options, they would still be the final arbiter of any visa decision. We came forward in good faith and they rejected it, as indeed some of my colleagues earlier have suggested. But I would say, and I would finish on this, if they are unwilling to put in place a system which meets the best needs of the people of Scotland, then they should give those powers to the people who will. Thank you very much.
Neil Hanby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm going to begin my remarks this evening by paying tribute to the many people who have come to Scotland to build a life among us. Each plays an important and valued part in Scotland's story, and their contribution to the tapestry of Scottish life makes Scotland a richer place to live, work and thrive. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know this because whilst I was not born in Scotland, Scotland made me welcome, and it will forever be the place that I call home. Whilst I may have spent my early years in the north of Ireland immersed in the Unionist tradition, the years in Scotland that followed this made it clear to me that there is no homogeneous British identity, no such thing as one nation. We are very different countries with differing values, principles and politics. In the early 90s, like so many in Scotland, I left for work, moving to London to pursue professional opportunities not available to me at home. My return in 2009 was a revelation. The success of the devolved government with its limited powers had begun to bring life to our distinct politic, and this was inspiring. However, this optimism was quickly tempered in 2010 by the return of a Tory government Scotland did not vote for. And since that day, it is my view that this place has worked to stymie the advances Scotland has made and to pour scorn on our ability and our ambition. The most recent example of this is the offhand contempt the UK Government has shown the people of Scotland in its response to the Scottish Government's proposals for a Scottish visa scheme within a post-Brexit UK. It is simply not credible that any meaningful consideration of the proposal took place. You must wonder if the Government's policy on Scotland is file it under B for bin. In this particular case, They dismiss the views of the organisations that support the Scottish Government's proposals, from business and rural communities, the Scottish DUC, FSB Scotland and the Scottish Council for Development and Industry. As noted in the motion, Scotland has distinct and different migration needs to sustain our population and help meet demographic challenges. The sole concession is alleged recognition for the need for some regional variation and claims that Scotland benefits from a separate shortage occupation list. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the first issue I have with this position is fundamental. Scotland is not a region, it is a country. The second point illustrates the complete lack of understanding this government, and indeed the Scottish Under-Secretary has, on Scotland's needs. Perhaps he should have a chat with his honourable friends from West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine and North Dorset. Whilst the government continues to promote their reductionist and hostile environment, Scotland wants to encourage and welcome people to build their life with us, among us, as one of us. If you can add New Scot to your shortage list, that would be a start. But what, Madam Deputy Speaker, of the local impact in my constituency? Innovate Foods and Dyser is a company that manufactures food for restaurants, retail and catering wholesalers. It employs 65 people, almost half of whom were born overseas. Some of the workers have been with Innovate for nearly 20 years, and the company has translated instructions and recipes into Polish, with some Scottish staff learning Polish to speak to their colleagues in the workforce. The director, Tony Dumbrek, told me that having a large migrant workforce has been a positive experience, remarking that they are generally well educated, have brought skills that are in demand, and they work very hard. He wants them to have as much stability and security as possible and considers them part of the Innovate family. His attitude is emblematic of the warm, inclusive attitude of the people in the communities I serve to those who choose to make Scotland their home. Since Brexit, they have lost some of the staff as a result of the toxic, hostile environment rhetoric. However, this is not his only concern, telling me, even with the reduced earnings threshold of 25,600, that will be a constraint to try to employ production workers. We perceive that fewer people will be coming here. Of course, this is not a surprise, although my immediate predecessor made no reference to migration in this place in her 2 years as an MP, save to criticise fellow Scottish MPs standing up for Scotland. Her predecessor, Roger Mullen, did give this matter appropriate focus both here and at home. In debates in this place in 2016, Mr Mullen stated that Scotland has different productivity needs, one of which relates to our attitude towards immigration. He would argue that we need more immigration of the right type. Locally, Roger convened meetings with groups of constituents to listen to and support them in their anxieties of a post-Brexit Scotland. He also worked with the Five Migrants Forum based in Kirkcaldy to better understand the challenges of the communities they serve. Under current UK immigration rules, highly talented workers are subject to the costly and bureaucratic Tier 1 exceptional talent visa process. The MAC has said that this system does not work well and found that only 600 main applicants had been admitted despite a cap of 2,000 visas. The UK Government has announced that a new global talent visa will be launched on 20th of February later this month as part of a post-Brexit immigration system, but many believe that with it being open to highly talented individuals only, it will still fail to address chronic skills shortages. Of course, visas serve an important function, but when they set the bar at an unrealistic or unnecessarily high level, they become an impediment to growth and ambition. Recognising there are different needs across the nations and regions of the UK, whilst applying a one-size-fits-all is as senseless as it is reckless. Whilst inward migration is undeniably important, Scotland also faces a retention challenge. The process to ensure applications for settled status are completed before the 30th of June cut-off is sadly farcical. Yesterday, representatives from Five Migrants Forum attended the EU Settled Status Conference here in London. in the hope that they would get some answers to vital questions. On the 31st of March, their funding runs out, and having already suffered due to impediments placed upon them by the Home Office, they have only been able to process around 700 of the expected 3,000 applications from some of the most vulnerable people across Fife. Without appropriate funding, some of these constituents may fall through the cracks if the knife falls in 6 weeks' time. They are particularly concerned about those members of our community who may now be in care homes. Who will fund them? Will they be removed? These are outrageous suggestions, but it is the reality of UK government policy. Madam Deputy Speaker, this also applies to students, employees, older people and those in the rural parts of my constituency. Yesterday they were told everything is in the hand of the politicians. Well, it's certainly not in the hands of the politicians that they elected. The government's continued hostile, unhelpful and toxic environment that weaponises the word migrant is an anathema to me and many in Scotland. We don't call them migrants in such a pejorative way. To us they are friends, neighbours, partners and workmates. When we ask where you're from, it is with warm and genuine interest rather than suspicion and mistrust. Yesterday, the Home Office Minister erroneously claimed that the Independent Migration Advisory Committee has consistently recommended against regional differences in salary thresholds for skilled worker visas. Its most recent report to the Government on a points-based system and salary thresholds did recommend that the Government pilot a separate visa for remote areas of the UK, including and involving all devolved administrations. Yeah, last one. Well, I think the current buzz line in the government is oven ready. Well, you know Scotland has an oven ready scheme. Why not try it?
Yeah. Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say, listening to the contributions from the benches opposite, it's a great pity that the UK Government is taking such a careless approach to the Scottish Government's proposals for a tailored migration system for Scotland. Because, as well as disregarding the need, which lies behind the very sensible visa proposals the Scottish Government's put forward, they're also disregarding the views of the Scottish Parliament, the STUC, the Federation of Small Businesses, the Scottish Council for the Development Industry, among many others. And that matters because it is the future of our country that the UK Government's messing with when they refuse to consider that all those people who are telling them that their system doesn't work for Scotland might be right. But still they're continuing with their inward-looking Brexit Britain, the ever more hostile environment and pulling up the drawbridge approach. That's not the best way for Scotland, and it's no wonder that we see a better future as an open, outward-looking, independent country. But they're determined to plough on down that road, wilfully disregarding the thoughtful and sensible visa proposals that the Scottish Government's put forward to help deliver the sustainable future that we need in Scotland. Because the thing is, Madam Deputy Speaker, we do need migration. Scotland is not full. We need people to come and live in Scotland, and we want them to come. They are welcome. We need to make sure that we can sustain and grow our population levels, and even if the UK Government doesn't, we realise how crucial that is to our future. In Scotland, all of our population growth for the next 25 years is projected to come from migration. So it's really beyond unhelpful that the UK Government is rowing back on commitments like the ones made by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, when he said that when it came to immigration, it would be for the people of Scotland to decide. But it's a different story now. So it must have been convenient then for him to say that Nicola Sturgeon's approach was the right one, as it is. But now we're back to the same old, with the UK Government just expecting us to get on with it and to hang with the consequences for Scotland. I haven't much time, so I'm sorry I won't. And the consequences for Scotland are serious. Our population growth slowing, our birth rates falling, we're ageing as a population. And it's a mystery to me, Madam Deputy Speaker, though perhaps not a surprise, why the UK Government seems so intent on avoiding any engagement with the Scottish Government on the Scottish visa, despite the serious and constructive nature of the proposals that have been put forward for discussion. Madam Deputy Speaker, I live in one of the most diverse places in Scotland, and it's home to people that have come from all over the world. It's a brilliant thing. It makes my community better. The people who have migrated to Scotland recently and over the decades have made Scotland better and richer for their presence. People have come to work in the NHS, in hospitality, in education, in public services. I could go on. But as things stand, the UK Government will be imposing harm on our communities now, which will only be greater in the future if they don't take our approach into account. So we need to have that power in Scotland for population and economic reasons, but it is much more than that. We benefit so much from that rich diversity that people coming to Scotland bring with them. And in Scotland, the people who want to live, work and raise their families as part of our communities are very welcome, and they have enriched our society. They've done that now, quite recently, but they've done that in the past too, by coming to live in Scotland, and I'm thankful for that. Our country is home to people with histories in all kinds of other places, and that makes us better now, and it will make us better into the future. Mr Speaker, I'll finish by reflecting on the words of our First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, in her speech at the opening of the Scottish Parliament in 2016. She said, whether we've lived here for generations or are new Scots from Europe, India, Pakistan, Africa, countries around the globe, we're all of this and more. We're so much stronger for the diversity that shapes us. We are one Scotland, and we are simply home to all those who choose to live here. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, migration is good for Scotland. We want migration. Scotland is open, and we wish to remain so. We need to be able to make the decisions that allow us to do the right thing for our country.
Dr Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I should declare an interest that many members in the Chamber will know. Of course, my husband Hans is German and has worked as a GP in Scotland for over 30 years, looking after Scottish people when they were ill, as indeed have many migrants from all sorts of places, not just Europe, but right across the world. People I worked with as colleagues and friends, people who lived near me as neighbours. And I just follow my colleague in celebrating them. I think there's a failure to recognise the sheer scale of the challenge Scotland faces. Scotland is 1/3 of the UK landmass. It is enormous. I know that on the weather map it looks small, but it isn't. It's actually huge. And the James Hutton Institute points out that half of that is defined as sparsely populated, and those areas could lose 1/4 of their population by the mid-40s unless action is taken. Now, because of freedom of movement, Scotland did have a growing population for a number of years, but Scottish net migration fell across the EU referendum from 31,500 in 2015 to 21,000 in 2017. That's a fall of 1/3. That is the impact of Brexit, even though we hadn't left. Now, Scotland has faced forced out-migration over centuries, right back to the clearances of the 18th and 19th century, when people were forcibly put on ships and sent elsewhere in the world. As the member for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine pointed out, we didn't just lose the individuals who left. We lost their children and grandchildren. We lost generations of people. And as he also mentioned, in 2017-18, there were over 7,500 more deaths than births, and 2018 had the second lowest ever registration of births. So Scotland's natural growth is falling, and all of our population growth over the next 1/4 of a century is expected to come from immigration. Otherwise, we will face a falling working-age population by the mid-2030s that will simply struggle to support our ageing population. He highlighted this demographic time bomb, but I didn't hear him offer a solution. 14 local authorities in Scotland already have a falling population, and that includes my constituency in the southwest of Scotland. The problem is, in the remote and rural areas, it becomes a worsening spiral. You are left with older communities, so young people go on leaving, which means there are fewer children. The population becomes smaller and ages rapidly. These are often stunningly beautiful parts of Scotland to which people from elsewhere in the UK and Scotland retire. Now, they're very welcome, but unfortunately that actually adds to the problem of ageing, and you can end up with communities that simply do not have enough young people within them to provide the social care or the health or even just the support. Now, the member for Forest of Dean said that Scotland needed to up its GDP growth. That was the issue. But the Fraser of Allender Institute highlighted that GDP growth rates were directly linked to population growth rates. The UK has predicted that its population will grow by over 7% in the coming years. Scotland's will only grow by 1%. And indeed, if action isn't taken, it may start to fall. The Migration Advisory Centre pointed out that EU citizens contributed £2,300 more in tax than natives because they come here after someone else has paid for their education and training. Now, isn't it a pity that report was requested in 2017 and not in 2015 before the EU referendum, where immigration and getting immigration down was made a central plank? The problem we have is that we need young people. We need young migrants into Scotland. People of working age who are low users of welfare, low users of NHS, and are not collectors of pensions. We need to attract them, not just based on a job that they're going to do for a few years, but to settle. That's what points-based systems are about. They're about giving someone quite early on in the process the right to settle and make their life there with their family. That is what Scotland requires. And these people bring diversity and energy and vitality into communities, which actually can help us retain our own young people. At the moment, UK visas are basically based on earnings. So younger people earn less. That's even in the minimum wage, which means they won't qualify for a visa. In rural areas, often salaries are much lower. So rural areas can't attract migrants because of the salary thresholds. It hits key sectors of which Scotland is highly represented, such as tourism, food and drink, agriculture, fishing. Now, I agree, it's great to see the seasonal workers' numbers increase from a paltry 2,500 to 10,000. But before they were cut, the UK had 64,000 seasonal workers. And as the member for West Aberdeenshire admitted himself, 70,000 might be a more realistic number. So when on earth will we reach that if we were only reaching 10,000 as a proposal? With fishing, there are many boats tied up on the west coast of Scotland for lack of crew, and that's the need for non-EEA visas, particularly for Filipino fishermen who come here. They don't bring families, they're not looking to settle, but they help provide training to attract in some young people locally from Scotland into the industry. I have written to the Secretary of State in the past, I've written to immigration ministers, it's been discussed in this chamber, having a seafarer's visa. And what we're told each time is we can't have any sectoral visas. So those who've said, oh, let's have sectoral visas, this government has already refused that. In the UK, there has already been 1/4 drop in European doctors coming to the UK since the Brexit referendum, and a 90% drop in European nurses coming, a 1/3 increase in European nurses leaving. In particular, young medical trainees can't come, because if, like me, you're a surgeon, you're committing to a training system that will last between 10 and 14 years. You can move when you're untrained, you can move when you're a consultant, but you can't afford to be kicked out in the middle, and you therefore require long-term security. The Nursing and Midwifery Council point out that 80% of UK-trained nurses are over 50. 72% of EU-trained staff are under 40. The problem is the government are judging on earning. They're judging on money instead of worth. They are not judging on the contribution that people make to the system and to the well-being of their community. The member for North Dorset admitted that you need a range of skills. Now, I can tell you as a surgeon, I need an anaesthetist. but I also need an orderly. I need someone who cleans the theatre. You need everyone. So this narrative of excluding unskilled or only allowing unskilled people to come for a year, who's going to invest in their training?
Yeah.
So the UK... No, there isn't time, sorry. The UK government said they wanted a system that would work for all parts of the UK, and yet when the Scottish government come forward with their proposal, it's refused without even reading it. The member for Streatham highlighted the shortages in other parts of the UK, including the north of England. Well, the Home Secretary said in October that they wanted an extra points into a points-based system to attract people to the north of England and coastal areas. So why refuse to consider a very similar system for Scotland? At the UK level, there's simply no visa which is aimed at settlement, aimed at giving security early on so that people really come and make their homes and their lives here. A points-based system would be based on migrant characteristics, not just having a job. They often quote Canada and Australia, as people have referred to, but the provincial nominee programme allows the province to set the criteria, assess the applicants, and if successful, it is the central government that actually issues the visa. This is a very modest request, supported by Civic Scotland, including the STUC Federation of Small Businesses. It's based on residence, as the Scottish tax code already is. It's simply that this modest proposal was not considered. Members are talking about reading it, but they read it after it was refused. I would just gently say you cannot keep a relationship or a marriage together by force. It is by respect and recognition and consideration of someone's needs. Failure to do so ends simply in divorce. Immigration is existential for Scotland, and failing to recognise that means that people in Scotland and businesses in Scotland will see there is only one way for us to get the policies we need.
Minister Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to wind up this debate. And I'd like to thank the SNP for this afternoon's important debate. It's been an opportunity to highlight the needs and challenges not only faced by Scotland, but across our United Kingdom. And in starting, it would be right to reflect on the maiden speech of the Honourable Member for Penistone and Stockbridge that we heard during the debate, and to congratulate her for a passionate explanation of what had driven her into politics, and I know she'll be a strong representative of her community. As the members on the SNP benches will know, I'm always only too keen to discuss a range of issues with all 59 of Scotland's members of Parliament here in this chamber. I understand remote areas and island communities face demographic pressures which have eroded the local workforce, leaving opportunities unfilled and threatening the stability of the rural economy. But as we said, that has happened with freedom of movement in place. And we need these issues to be addressed across our union, not just by individual parts of our union. Yet the Scottish Government's policy paper proposes measures which go against the recommendations of the Independent and Impartial Migration Advisory Committee. The MAC have consistently advised against applying different immigration arrangements to different areas of the UK, and this cannot be stressed enough. As such, we have no plans to devolve immigration and create invisible borders within our United Kingdom, in effect an economic version of Hadrian's Wall or Offa's Dyke. This government is clear. Our points-based immigration system will serve the needs of the whole United Kingdom, including Scotland. And it goes without saying, any national differences in the rules or visa offers around the UK would result in an overly complex system at a time we are trying to streamline and simplify the process, rather than creating additional burdens for businesses, employers and migrants. And I appreciated the comments from the Shadow Minister and the spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats. We might disagree on aspects of the migration policy, where we would draw the line, but I think we can both rightly say that to have a system based on whether your job's in Gretna or Gateshead would present challenges in terms of its implementation. And as we said, and we hear some chuckling from opposite, but there are many workers whose job is necessarily based across our United Kingdom. Members of Parliament are a good example. Whitehall and the Palace of Westminster is where I am during the week, but Torbay is also my main place of work. And I know honourable members opposite are in a similar position. My point is there are millions of workers who work regularly requires them to move between locations, and we do not wish to create a border for them in doing so within our United Kingdom. And it is simply unrealistic and undesirable to create a visa which binds a person to one part of the United Kingdom, opening the door to uncertain enforcement and complex bureaucracy, plus create routes to avoid and abuse the provisions to obtain where it is seeking to undermine other areas of immigration policy. And that is why we do not believe that this is the appropriate process to go down. Yet, that doesn't mean we don't want to hear what people say about the actual policies that underline. The first intervention, one of the first calls in this debate from a member of the Scottish National Party was to have a graduate route for those who've been here on a Tier 4 visa, studying a course, and members may be interested to note that we've actually had university-sponsored applications increase by 14% over the last year to over 220,000, the highest ever level. I'm afraid, due to the time and the length of the debate, and I've noticed not many interventions being taken opposite, I'll have to make progress. And then next year, we'll be opening the graduate route to allow those who've been here at any skill level for work for 2 years after completing their studies. So again, showing where we are listening and where we are making a difference. I listened to the points from the member for Nehilion and Ayr about the fishing industry, and I know, again, this is one that's been important to members on these bench, and we will look carefully at the recommendation for an immigration pilot for remote communities and how that could potentially assist in this area. But I would say that I've never considered the vibrant cities of Glasgow and Edinburgh as remote, and I don't think anyone else would. Similarly, as the member for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine pointed out, we've already taken the decisions to increase the seasonal agricultural workers pilot to 10,000, again following feedback about the needs of the Scottish economy. So there are many areas where we are taking on board the views that are expressed. And, I would say the best example is where I was on the day the Scottish Government produced its plans. And that was at Glasgow University, talking specifically about the changes to the Tier 1, creating the uncapped global talent route that will allow the universities to put together research teams not based on passports, but based on the skills they need to deliver accredited projects. Hearing the excitement, seeing the opportunity, the sample of literally a Scottish interest, Scottish stakeholders, absolutely at the heart of designing the UK's immigration policy in the way that affects them. And similarly, we're looking further at how we can work through the Tier 4 system with those organisations, particularly those universities with a high compliance rate, to make sure it works even better for them. Yet the key is ensuring talent across the world sees the great potential of Scotland, as the UK government does. And that means creating an attractive environment for investment, for working there. And the Scottish Government, of course, has power over vast swathes of public life in Scotland: education, healthcare, infrastructure and taxation. And it perhaps may wish to question itself just how its impact in terms of welcoming people by making Scotland one of the highest tax part of the United Kingdom is, with their own policy decisions. It has control of all the necessary levers to encourage investment, build an educated and skilled workforce and secure Scotland's economic future. With all these tools available, why do they still seek to sow division? That's because separatism, not Scotland's future, is their first priority. The members opposite should ask themselves whether the failings in education that Nicola Sturgeon has presided over has anything to do with Scottish companies seeking talent from elsewhere, or whether any number of overseas medical professionals will deal with the issues in the Scottish Health Service. Yet this government will create, and in response to demand, an NHS visa system that makes it easy to recruit health workers. But again, that will not necessarily tackle the core issues of failure of domestic policy set by the Scottish National Party. As I've pointed out in this debate, immigration has brought a vast wealth of experience, expertise and diversity to the United Kingdom. And we've seen some great examples and good examples today here in this debate of where that has taken place. Yet it cannot be used as a stopgap or to make up for the failings of nationalist policies elsewhere. Above all, those who choose to come and make their lives in the United Kingdom should be welcomed across all 4 nations, not used to stoke constitutional grievances and try to set up a border at Berwick. For this United Kingdom government, we look at the proposals and they talk about settlement. Is it settlement purely in Scotland for the rest of the life? Is it in terms of elsewhere? And again, for us, the story is to look at the themes, to look at the needs, to look at the requirements, rather than to just look at how we can break up the United Kingdom. I'm very clear that there will be challenges across our union. There will be challenges to address. But the idea that, for example, we do this based on the nations of the United Kingdom misses the idea that, for example, Torbay's economy is instantly comparable to London, because it happens to be in England, and that a solution in terms of the Scottish Highlands would be appropriate by having the same visa available for Edinburgh, just I think misses some of the key ways our economy works. But again, I'm conscious that this is something that was decided more by just a government setting up a review to look for its destination of separation, rather than to genuinely look at how life patterns work across our United Kingdom. But for me, we're clear we will listen to feedback. We've written back to the Scottish Government and we will listen to feedback from stakeholders and the Scottish Government about how our future migration system can work. We will look at what the policies will deliver and how they will deliver success across our United Kingdom. And that will be the focus for our policies and our plans and how we take this forward. And as making ourselves a nation which prioritises and embraces a bright, optimistic future for Scotland, a place whose natural beauty is second to none. But what we will also do is we will reject the separatist view of a grievance-based culture of constitutional arguments, as I know this House will do tonight.
Order. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobby. Order. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Hull Williams and Jonathan Edwards. Tellers for the noes, Maggie Throop and David Rutley. Lock the doors. Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 46. The noes to the left, 322.
Right, accept that. I don't want to do it again.
The ayes to the right, 46. The noes to the left, 322. The noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. now come to motion number 4 on local government. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order papers, members of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. And motion number 5 on criminal law. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order papers, members of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes. No, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 6 on business of the House. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Petition, Mr. Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Glasgow University's Student Action for Refugees recently hosted the Museum Without a Home exhibition, displaying everyday objects in solidarity with migrants and refugees around the world, and at the same time collected over 600 signatures for the Families Together petition, calling for refugee children to have the right to be reunited with their parents in their home. And a smaller number have signed the petition I'm now presenting in the House of Commons style, which makes the same demand. To the House of Commons, the petition of residents of Glasgow North declares that under current family reunion rules, adult refugees can only sponsor their partners and children under 18 years old to join them in the UK. Further, that child refugees in the UK have no family reunion rights, so they can't bring their parents to join them. Further, that the lack of opportunities for refugees to reunite with family members forces people to turn to smugglers and exacerbates the humanitarian crisis in southern Europe. And further, that for refugees already living safely in the UK, the enforced separation from their families and constant anxiety about their well-being can be devastating, preventing them from rebuilding their lives and undermining their successful integration into their new communities. The petitioners therefore request that the House of Commons urges the Government to expand the criteria of those who qualify as a family member for the purposes of refugee family reunion, including by allowing adult refugees in the UK to sponsor their adult children, their siblings that are under the age of 25 and their parents. Further, to give unaccompanied refugee children in the UK the right to sponsor their parents and siblings that are under the age of 25 to join them under the refugee family reunion rules. And further, to reintroduce legal aid for refugee family reunion cases. And the petitioners remain, etc.
Petition, refugee family reunion.
I beg to move this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Marta de Cordova.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am pleased to have secured this important debate. The media is a fundamental part of the way that we see and understand the world. According to